My name is Naomi, and at 29 years old, I am the secret founder and CEO of Onyx Capital, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm. But if you asked my family in Atlanta, they would tell you I am just the ungrateful runaway daughter who lacked the Pierce ambition. 5 years ago, my father looked me dead in the eyes across a Thanksgiving feast and told me I was no longer part of his family. Why? Because I refused to drain my entire life savings to fund my older brother's doomed tech startup. When I walked out of their Buckhead mansion into the freezing rain, they thought I was leaving with absolutely nothing. They had no idea that being disowned was the greatest financial advantage I could have ever asked for. Before I continue this story, let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. Hit like and subscribe if you have ever had to build your own empire after your family tried to tear you down. The dining room of my parents' Buckhead estate smelled of collard greens, roasted turkey, and suffocating tension. I was 24, working as a junior financial analyst, and had spent 4 grueling years saving $50,000 by living in a cramped studio and eating ramen. It was my safety net, my escape fund, my proof that I could survive without the Pierce family wealth holding me hostage. My father Desmond sat at the head of the table. He was a real estate tycoon who ruled our family like a dictatorship. Beside him sat my mother Vivica, her flawless makeup reflecting her status as an Atlanta socialite. And then there was my older brother Andre, the golden child, sitting next to his wife Chantel. Andre had just finished pitching his latest business venture, a luxury delivery app that made absolutely no financial sense. It was his fourth startup in 3 years. The first three had completely tanked, burning through hundreds of thousands of dollars of our father's money. But in the Pierce family, Andre's failures were treated as stepping stones to greatness, while my steady, quiet achievements were ignored. Naomi, my father said, his voice dropping into that authoritative tone that usually made board members tremble. Your brother needs capital to get this off the ground. I have already provided the initial seed money, but the investors want to see family skin in the game. You are going to transfer your $50,000 to his holding account by Monday morning. I set down my fork, staring at him in disbelief. I had expected another uncomfortable holiday dinner, but I had not anticipated a shakedown. Dad, that is my entire life savings, I replied, fighting to keep my voice steady. I have been saving that money for a down payment on my own place. I cannot put it into a high-risk startup that does not even have a solid revenue model. The temperature in the room dropped 10 degrees. Andre let out a loud, condescending sigh, leaning back in his chair. Come on, Naomi, he groaned. It is just a minor cash injection. I will pay you back with interest once we secure Series A funding. You are just a junior accountant anyway. It is not like you know what to do with that kind of liquidity. I am a financial analyst. I corrected him, and I know exactly what to do with it. Which is why I am not handing it over to a company with a burn rate that will bankrupt you in 6 months. My father's fist slammed onto the mahogany table, making the crystal wine glasses rattle. You do not disrespect your brother in this house, he roared, his face flushed with anger. This family operates on loyalty. I built my real estate empire from the ground up, and I expect my children to support each other. You have always lacked the Pierce vision. You hoard your little pennies while Andre is out here thinking like a mogul. If you do not invest in your older brother's startup, then from this moment on, you are no longer part of this family. The silence that followed was suffocating. I looked at my mother, desperately hoping she would intervene, hoping she would see the sheer insanity of demanding a daughter bankrupt herself for a son's ego. But Vivica simply picked up her wineglass and turned her face away, adjusting her diamond necklace. Your father is right, she said coldly, not even making eye contact with me. We raised you to understand legacy, but clearly you do not belong at this table. Chantel, my sister-in-law, let out a sharp, mocking laugh. She patted Andre's arm and looked at me with pure disdain. You are just bitter, Naomi. Do not take your insecurities out on Andre just because you did not get into Spelman like the rest of the women in this family. You have always been the weak link. You should be grateful they are even giving you a chance to be part of something big. Her words were meant to sting. For my entire life, I had been the scapegoat, the daughter who chose a quiet state university over the prestigious, historically black colleges my mother and Chantel flaunted. I looked around the table at the people who were supposed to love me. I saw greed, arrogance, and a lack of respect. I realized they did not see me as a daughter. They saw me as a resource to be exploited for the golden child. I stood up slowly, pushing my chair back. I did not yell. I did not cry. I picked up my coat and looked my father dead in the eye. "Fine," I said, my voice eerily calm. "If that is what everyone wants, I will leave." I walked out of the dining room, leaving my half-eaten meal and 24 years of emotional abuse behind me. I stepped out the front door into a freezing torrential downpour. I did not have an umbrella, but I did not care. I walked down the long, sweeping driveway of their Buckhead estate, climbed into my beat-up Honda Civic, and locked the doors. The rain hammered against the windshield as I sat there soaking wet and officially disowned. My hands were shaking, not from the cold but from the adrenaline. I pulled out my phone. An email notification popped up on the screen. It was from a top-tier private equity firm in New York. "Congratulations, Naomi. You passed your final Wall Street financial examinations with perfect marks. We are thrilled to welcome you to the team." I stared at the screen, a slow smile spreading across my face. They thought I was a failure. They thought I would come crawling back. They were wrong. 5 years later, the torrential rain of Atlanta was a distant memory, replaced by the sunlit skyline of Manhattan. I stood in a sleek glass-walled boardroom on the 50th floor, wearing a tailored suit that cost more than my brother's entire development budget. I had just finished closing a $500 million acquisition. The private equity firm I joined 5 years ago was now mine. I had acquired controlling shares, rebranded it as Onyx Capital, and transformed it into a multi-billion-dollar powerhouse. I was no longer the frightened girl in the Honda Civic. I was a predator in the financial waters, calculating, ruthless, and invisible. The media called me the ghost of Wall Street because I never gave interviews and kept my identity hidden behind holding companies. Beside me stood my husband, Isaiah Sterling. Isaiah was a brilliant corporate attorney specializing in mergers and acquisitions. He was the only person who matched my drive and understood my past. He placed a hand on my waist as the executives filed out. "Another flawless victory," he murmured. Just as I turned to reply, my personal cell phone began to ring. I glanced at the caller ID and felt my blood run cold. It was Vivica. My mother had not called me in 5 years. Not for my birthday, not when I got married, never. I answered, putting it on speaker. "Naomi," her voice crackled, crisp and demanding, skipping any greeting. "Your brother's tech company is having a minor cash flow issue. You need to fly down to Atlanta immediately and co-sign a document for him. We know you have a little consulting job up there. It is time to step up and do your duty for this family." I did not say a word. I simply ended the call. I looked at Isaiah, a dangerous, thrilling energy coursing through my veins. "Let us go to Atlanta," I said, a cold smile forming on my lips. "It is time to collect." They thought they could snap their fingers and summon me. They were about to learn a very expensive, extremely painful, and highly permanent lesson. The flight to Atlanta was swift and silent. By Friday evening, Isaiah and I stepped out of a sleek black town car and onto the brightly lit valet driveway of the most exclusive country club in Buckhead. This was the annual Heritage Charity Gala, an event where the elite of Atlanta gathered to flaunt their wealth, secure backroom corporate deals, and maintain their pristine social images. For the Pierce family, attendance at this specific event was absolutely mandatory. I knew exactly where to find them. I had dressed for absolute warfare. While my mother and sister-in-law favored flashy designer logos and ostentatious diamonds that screamed for public attention, I wore a custom-tailored emerald silk gown. It lacked a recognizable brand logo, but commanded the kind of quiet, lethal luxury that only true, unimaginable wealth could buy. Isaiah stood tall beside me in a perfectly cut midnight blue tuxedo. We moved through the crowded, opulent ballroom like shadows, slipping past the local politicians and real estate moguls who used to treat me like an invisible prop in the background of my father's life. It did not take long for them to spot me. I was standing near the grand archway leading to the catering kitchens, sipping sparkling water, when the Pierce family formation descended upon us. Desmond led the charge, his jaw tight and his posture completely rigid. Vivica flanked his left side, her eyes scanning my dress with immediate predatory calculation, trying to figure out if I had rented it for the night. Andre sauntered closely behind them, exuding unearned confidence, while his wife Chantel clung tightly to his arm, holding a large glass of dark red wine. They quickly maneuvered and cornered me against the wall near the kitchen entrance, deliberately pushing me away from the high-profile guests. To them, I was still the disgraced poor daughter who belonged out of sight, grouped with the hired help. Naomi, my father, snapped, completely ignoring Isaiah, who was standing just a few feet away. I am glad you decided to show some common sense and fly down here. We do not have time for small talk. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily redacted document. He shoved a high-end fountain pen toward my chest with aggressive force. "Sign this right here at the bottom," he ordered, tapping a specific signature line on the last page. "It is a guarantor agreement. Your brother has secured a $5 million bridge loan for his new tech firm, but the strict underwriters are requesting one additional family signature to clear the final compliance check. It is just a minor formality. Sign it quickly so we can get back to entertaining our important guests." I looked down at the physical document. Large black marker lines covered the primary lender details and the collateral agreements. It was a blatant, sloppy attempt to hide the actual financial terms of the massive loan. I kept my hands firmly at my sides and looked back up at his demanding, impatient face. "You want me to blindly guarantee a $5 million corporate loan for a failing company that has zero market traction?" I asked, my voice completely level and devoid of any emotion. Andre stepped forward, chuckling loudly as he aggressively adjusted the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist. It was a watch I knew my father had paid for after Andre maxed out his credit cards. "Relax, little sis," Andre said, flashing his signature arrogant smile. "Do not overthink the business side of things. You are just a mid-level analyst. You do not need to understand the complex financial engineering behind this merger. Just put your name on the dotted line. To show my deep appreciation for your little signature, I will personally throw you a 1% advisory fee from my executive operating account. That cash should be more than enough for you to finally upgrade that cheap beat-up sedan you used to drive around in." Chantel let out a sharp, breathless laugh, leaning her head against Andre's shoulder like a devoted prize. "You really should take the generous deal, Naomi," she sneered, looking me up and down with obvious disgust. "A 1% fee is probably more money than you make in an entire year fetching coffee in New York City. You should be thanking Andre on your knees for throwing you a bone after you selfishly turned your back on this family." I looked at my brother, taking in his smug, entitled expression, and then shifted my steady gaze to my father, who was still holding the gold pen out like a weapon meant to break me. "I am not signing anything," I stated clearly, my voice carrying over the low hum of the gala music. "And I am certainly not attaching my legal name to a heavily redacted financial document without having my corporate attorney review every single page." My father's face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. "You ungrateful little brat," he hissed, leaning in extremely close so the nearby kitchen waiters would not hear him screaming. "You owe this family everything you have. I gave you the Pierce name. You will sign this paper right now, or I will make sure you never find a job in the financial sector again. I will completely ruin you." "I am not signing it, Desmond," I repeated, purposely using his first name. It was the first time I had ever addressed him that way, and the blatant disrespect hit his massive ego like a physical blow. Before my father could explode into a louder rage, Chantel lunged forward. Her face was twisted in a vicious theatrical scowl. "You actually think you are better than us?" She practically shrieked, her voice suddenly loud enough to intentionally draw the attention of several wealthy guests standing nearby. "You think you can just march back into Atlanta and act like you are somebody important?" With a swift, calculated flick of her wrist, Chantel tilted her heavy wine glass forward. The dark, sticky burgundy liquid splashed directly onto the bodice of my emerald silk gown, staining the expensive fabric instantly. She did not even attempt to make the sudden motion look like an accident. Oh my goodness, Chantel gasped with fake exaggerated horror, speaking loudly to ensure the growing crowd of elite onlookers heard every single word she said. I am so terribly sorry. I guess I just tripped in my heels. But really, Naomi, what did you expect coming here tonight to extort your own family for cash? Whispers rapidly erupted around us. Dozens of eyes turned toward the kitchen archway, watching the drama unfold with eager fascination. Vivica immediately stepped into her highly practiced role as the deeply burdened matriarch. She placed a dramatic hand over her heart and looked at the audience of wealthy socialites with fake tears in her eyes. Please forgive my daughter, Vivica announced loudly, her tone dripping with manufactured pity. She has always struggled heavily with her mental health. She is the ungrateful runaway daughter who abandoned us 5 years ago. And now she shows up to our charity event trying to demand money from her highly successful brother. We have tried everything to help her, but some people simply refuse to be saved. They had orchestrated the entire public scene perfectly. They backed me into a corner, demanded my signature on a shady document, and when I refused, they publicly humiliated me to violently control the narrative. They wanted the elite of Atlanta to view me as a pathetic, unstable extortionist, ensuring that if I ever tried to speak out against them, absolutely no one in their circle would believe a word I said. Chantel smirked at me, a victorious, nasty gleam shining in her dark eyes. You really should leave, Naomi, she whispered viciously under her breath. Get out of here before you embarrass yourself any further. I looked down at the dark red stains spreading across my beautiful gown. 5 years ago, this exact situation would have shattered my confidence entirely. I would have run out of the venue in tears, feeling completely worthless, broken, and deeply ashamed of my existence. But today I did not feel an ounce of shame or fear. I felt a cold, absolute, and terrifying clarity. I looked at Chantel, then at my mother, and finally at my father. I did not scream. I did not defend myself to the whispering crowd. I simply turned around and walked away, my head held high, my posture completely unbroken. Isaiah followed closely behind me, his sharp expression perfectly unreadable to the surrounding guests. We exited the loud, crowded ballroom and stepped out into the quiet, dimly lit valet corridor. The cool, refreshing night air of Atlanta washed over my face. I stood perfectly still for a moment, letting the heavy doors close behind us, completely blocking out the sound of the gala. Isaiah reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his highly encrypted tablet. He tapped the glowing screen a few times, his eyes scanning a stream of secure financial data that had just finished compiling. His law firm had been running a deep forensic background check on Andre's tech company ever since my mother made that demanding phone call to my office. I looked over at him, adjusting my stained dress. Did you get the hidden lender details that my father desperately tried to black out on that contract? I asked quietly. Isaiah looked up from his bright screen, a predatory, dangerous glint flashing in his eyes. They did not just bring you down here to intimidate you into signing a guarantee, Naomi. He said, his voice deadly serious and completely calm. They brought you here because they are desperately trying to cover their tracks and avoid federal prison. What do you mean? I asked, stepping closer to look at the glowing tablet in his hands. Isaiah turned the digital screen toward me so I could read the text. It displayed a highly confidential loan agreement from a predatory, ruthless shadow lender known in the industry as Vanguard Credit. At the very bottom of the final page, bold and perfectly clear, was my full legal name, Naomi Pierce. But I had never seen this official document in my entire life. They did not just ask you to sign the paperwork today. Naomi, Isaiah continued, pointing directly at the digital timestamp located on the finalized contract. He was already way too late for that strategy. Andre already forged your signature on the preliminary loan documents a whole week ago. I stared at the glowing screen of Isaiah's tablet, my eyes tracing the perfect digital replication of my own handwriting. My brother had not just tried to intimidate me into a terrible financial decision. He had committed a federal felony. The cool Atlanta night air suddenly felt thick and suffocating as the reality of the situation settled over me. I zoomed in on the electronic document, examining the specific lender details. The institution was Vanguard Credit. I knew that name perfectly well from my years navigating the ruthless underbelly of corporate finance. They were not a traditional, reputable bank. They were a predatory shadow lender known for targeting desperate developers with exorbitant interest rates and draconian default penalties. If you missed a payment with Vanguard, they did not just send a polite collection agency. They seized physical assets, froze bank accounts, and aggressively pursued criminal charges against guarantors to force immediate devastating settlements. Isaiah swiped to the next page of the secure dossier, his jaw set in a hard, unforgiving line. Andre used your pristine credit score and your clean legal background to secure the initial approval, Isaiah explained, his voice low and urgent in the quiet valet corridor. He knew his own credit was completely destroyed from his last 3 failed startups. By forging your signature as the primary financial guarantor, he legally bound you to this $5 million debt. If his new tech company defaults, which we both know it absolutely will, Vanguard Credit will not go after Andre. They will come directly after you. You could face federal wire fraud charges, Naomi. You could go to federal prison for his crimes. The heavy velvet doors of our reserved town car opened, and we slid into the plush leather seats. As the driver pulled away from the country club, leaving my toxic family behind to enjoy their superficial gala, a strange sensation washed over me. 5 years ago, discovering this level of profound betrayal would have sent me into a full panic attack. I would have called the police immediately, crying hysterically, begging the authorities to believe that I had nothing to do with my brother's financial fraud. But I was no longer that vulnerable, discarded daughter who needed their validation. I was a corporate apex predator, and predators do not panic when they are threatened by weaker animals. They simply prepare to strike back with overwhelming force. When we arrived at our penthouse suite at the St. Regis in Buckhead, I did not reach for a tissue to wipe away tears. I reached for my highly encrypted phone. I dialed the direct secure line of Harrison Caldwell, the chief financial officer of Onyx Capital. He answered on the second ring, despite it being nearly midnight on the East Coast. "Harrison," I said, pacing across the expansive marble floor of the suite, my stained emerald gown rustling around my ankles. "I need a complete financial breakdown of a shadow lending firm operating out of the Southeast. They are called Vanguard Credit. I need to know their liquidity status, their major shareholders, and their current vulnerability to an immediate hostile takeover." I heard the rapid clicking of a mechanical keyboard on the other end of the line. "Give me 2 minutes, boss," Harrison replied, his tone shifting into high gear. Isaiah poured me a glass of sparkling water, watching me with a look of deep, profound admiration. He knew exactly what I was about to do. I was not going to play defense and hire lawyers to dispute the signature. I was going to buy the entire battlefield. Harrison's voice came back through the speaker, crisp and entirely professional. "Vanguard Credit is heavily over-leveraged, Naomi. They recently took a massive, catastrophic hit on a series of bad commercial real estate loans down in Miami. Their board of directors is currently panicking behind closed doors. They are desperately looking for a quiet buyout to avoid a public collapse and a subsequent federal investigation into their highly questionable lending practices. They are incredibly vulnerable right now. They are bleeding cash." "Perfect," I responded, staring out the floor-to-ceiling windows at the glittering Atlanta skyline. "I want Onyx Capital to acquire them, initiate a hostile takeover immediately, bypass their board and go straight to their primary distressed debt holders. Offer them a premium they absolutely cannot refuse, but the transaction must be executed and finalized before Monday morning. I want complete controlling ownership of Vanguard Credit by the time the financial markets open." "Understood," Harrison said without a single moment of hesitation. "Consider it done." I ended the call and tossed the phone onto the plush velvet sofa. Just as it landed, the bright screen lit up with an incoming call. The caller ID flashed my brother's name, Andre. I stared at the device as it vibrated violently against the fabric. I did not answer it. I let it ring until it automatically diverted to voicemail. A minute later, a notification popped up indicating he had left an audio message. I tapped the screen and pressed play, amplifying the volume so Isaiah could hear every word. Andre's voice echoed through the quiet penthouse suite. He sounded slightly out of breath and heavily intoxicated, likely celebrating what he thought was his brilliant victory at the charity gala. "Listen to me very carefully, Naomi." Andre slurred his tone, dripping with unearned arrogance and toxic entitlement. I know your sharp little lawyer husband probably figured out the signature situation by now. But you are going to keep your mouth shut and play along. Do you hear me? You are not going to call the police and you are not going to make a scene. I listened as he let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Dad put up 3 of his most valuable commercial properties in Buckhead as collateral to secure the secondary terms of this loan. He explicitly authorized. I listened as he let out a harsh, mocking laugh that sent a chill down my spine. Dad put up 3 of his most valuable commercial properties in Buckhead as collateral to secure the secondary terms of this loan. He explicitly authorized me to do whatever it took to get this funding. If you blow the whistle on this forged signature, you do not just ruin me. You destroy Dad's entire real estate company. You destroy the entire Pierce family legacy. You will be held responsible for bankrupting your own parents. So be a good little sister, stay quiet, and let the real businessmen handle things. Do not blow the whistle or I swear I will make you deeply regret it. The voicemail ended with a sharp click. I stood completely still, absorbing the sheer magnitude of their collective delusion and corruption. My father, Desmond Pierce, a man who prided himself on his ruthless business acumen and highly curated public image, had actually risked his own commercial real estate empire to back a fraudulent loan for his wildly incompetent son. He had willingly served me up as the sacrificial lamb, perfectly fine with letting me face federal prison time just to protect his precious golden boy. They genuinely believed they had me trapped in an inescapable corner. They thought guilt and family loyalty would force me to absorb the devastating consequences of their terrible crimes. Isaiah walked over and gently took the phone from my hand. He looked at me, his sharp legal mind already calculating the ultimate fallout. They handed you the keys to their entire kingdom. Naomi, he said softly, a dark smile playing on his lips. By using Desmond's properties as collateral for a loan you are about to own, they just gave you the legal right to seize everything they have ever built the very second Andre defaults on that payment. I nodded, a cold, unwavering determination settling deep inside my chest. They did not just give me the keys, Isaiah. They practically gift-wrapped their own execution order. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological endurance. I remained isolated. The next 48 hours were a masterclass in psychological endurance. I remained isolated in the luxury penthouse suite, entirely ignoring the barrage of text messages and passive-aggressive emails flooding in from Vivica and Chantel. They were desperately trying to bait me into an emotional response, sending group photos from elite Atlanta brunches, captioning them with snide remarks about family loyalty and forgiveness. They were frantic to ensure I was staying quiet and compliant, hoping their public intimidation at the gala had worked. I did not engage with them at all. I simply watched the clock, waiting patiently for the financial gears of my massive empire to turn. Sunday evening finally arrived, painting the vast Atlanta sky in vibrant shades of bruised purple and burnt orange. I sat at the glass dining table sipping black coffee, carefully reviewing the final restructuring documents for Onyx Capital. The silence in the suite was incredibly heavy, thick with the anticipation of impending war. My entire life had led to this exact turning point. Every insult, every rejection, every moment I was made to feel inferior because I did not fit their superficial status-obsessed mold. It was all about to be rectified in the most brutal, legally binding way possible. At exactly 8 o'clock in the evening, my encrypted phone illuminated the darkened room. It was Harrison. I answered immediately, placing the device on speaker. Isaiah stood close beside me, his arms crossed over his chest, his intense gaze locked on the device. Boss Harrison's voice came through the speaker, crisp, highly energetic, and deeply triumphant. We successfully executed the hostile takeover. It cost us a heavy premium to bypass the bureaucratic red tape over the weekend, but the distressed debt holders eagerly took our aggressive buyout offer. The transaction has been officially recorded and fully finalized by our legal compliance team. Onyx Capital just bought out Vanguard Credit in its entirety. You are now the sole owner and majority shareholder of the firm. I took a slow, deep breath, letting the sheer magnitude of his words wash over me. The deadly trap my family had so carefully laid for me had just become their very own prison. and the specific bridge loan processed under Andre Pierce. Pierce, I asked, my voice barely above a whisper, trembling slightly with pure adrenaline. Harrison let out a low, knowing chuckle that resonated through the room. Verified, secured, and fully transferred into your direct executive portfolio, Naomi. You now personally own Andre's $5 million debt. And because the loan was originally secured through fraudulent means, you have the absolute legal authority to call in the entire balance immediately without granting them a single grace period. I looked up at Isaiah, the reflection of the city lights dancing in the dark glass windows behind him. The Pierce family thought they were playing a game of chess with a helpless, isolated pawn. They had absolutely no idea that I had just bought the entire board. It was Monday morning when the vicious whispers began to slither through the affluent manicured circles of Buckhead. Andre and my father had realized their shadow lender was suddenly bought out over the weekend, but they remained completely oblivious to the fact that Onyx Capital belonged to me. Instead of panicking publicly or seeking a quiet resolution, my family decided to double down on their false, destructive narrative. Chantel, eager to fiercely protect her perceived high society status, spearheaded a relentless smear campaign against my character. My former friends, distant relatives, and corporate acquaintances began receiving unsolicited phone calls and lengthy text messages painting me as a desperate, financially ruined woman. Chantel spun an elaborate tale claiming I had returned to Atlanta solely to extort money from my wealthy, benevolent parents to pay off massive personal debts. She weaponized the social scene, ensuring that every elite circle in the city viewed me as an unstable threat before I could ever utter a single word in my own defense. The absolute climax of her toxic game arrived on a Tuesday afternoon in the form of a heavily embossed gold-foiled invitation delivered directly to my luxury hotel suite. It was an invitation to the annual Pierce Family Foundation charity luncheon. This was an incredibly exclusive event hosted by my mother Vivica, supposedly to raise substantial funds for historically black colleges and universities in the Atlanta area. A handwritten note from Chantel was clipped to the very front of the thick cardstock. It read, "Naomi, please come. We will cover the cost of your plate. It is high time you witnessed what real tangible success looks like." Isaiah stood behind me in our penthouse reading the condescending note over my shoulder. He let out a sharp, cynical laugh that echoed across the marble floor. "Are you actually going to entertain her wild delusions?" he asked, adjusting his tailored tie. I ran my fingers over the gold foil of the invitation, a cold, calculated smile forming on my lips. "I would not miss it for the world," I replied. "I need to look them directly in the eyes and see exactly how deep their financial corruption truly runs. They want a public spectacle, so I will give them an audience." I arrived at the luxurious Botanical Garden Pavilion later that afternoon, dressed for absolute psychological warfare. While the other women in attendance draped themselves in flashy designer logos, heavy diamond necklaces, and ostentatious displays of new money, I wore a perfectly tailored charcoal gray blazer with matching wide-leg trousers. I carried no recognizable brand names and wore no flashy jewelry. True wealth whispers quietly in the background, while fake wealth screams desperately for attention. And Chantel was screaming at the top of her lungs. The moment I stepped through the grand glass doors of the sunlit pavilion, the low murmur of the gathered elite instantly died down. Dozens of perfectly manicured women turned in their seats to stare at me. Their eyes were filled with the manufactured condescending pity that Chantel had so carefully orchestrated over the past 48 hours. I kept my posture completely rigid and my expression utterly unreadable as a waiter escorted me to the main table at the center of the room. Chantel made a grand theatrical show of greeting me. She stood up from her chair, clapping her hands together with fake delight, and loudly welcomed me to the table, intentionally making sure everyone within a 50-foot radius could hear her patronizing, syrupy tone. "Naomi, I am so incredibly glad you could make it," Chantel announced, gesturing for me to sit in a folding chair, placed slightly apart from the plush seating of the other guests. "We were so worried you might not have anything appropriate to wear to a high-profile charity event like this, but you look perfectly fine, very modest, very practical." I did not take the bait. I simply took my seat and folded my hands neatly on my lap. Thank you for the invitation, Chantel. The venue is beautiful, I said, keeping my voice perfectly level and devoid of any emotional reaction. Chantel was practically vibrating with smug, triumphant energy. She sat back down and immediately drew the entire table's attention to the item sitting dead center in front of her plate. It was a brand new, pristine Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag. It was the ultimate undisputed status symbol in her superficial world, a highly coveted accessory that easily retailed for $30,000 on the luxury market. She placed it on the table like a hard-won battle trophy, gently stroking the exotic leather so the sunlight would catch the hardware. One of the prominent socialites sitting across from us gasped loudly. Chantel, that bag is absolutely breathtaking. How on earth did you manage to get your hands on that specific model? Chantel let out a breathless, rehearsed laugh, tossing her hair over her shoulder. Oh, you know my Andre, she boasted, her voice carrying across the silent room. He surprised me with it just this morning. He wanted to properly celebrate the booming success of his new tech company. His application is generating record-breaking profits right now, and investors are practically begging to throw money at him. He told me I deserved a small token of appreciation for being such a supportive wife through his massive corporate expansion. I stared at the ridiculously expensive bag, my mind immediately calculating the sheer impossibility. I stared at the ridiculously expensive bag, my mind immediately calculating the sheer impossibility of her claim. I knew for an absolute undeniable fact that Andre's tech company had exactly $0 in liquid assets. He was heavily over-leveraged, drowning in unpayable debts, and I literally owned the fraudulent $5 million loan he had used to desperately keep the lights on. There was no booming success. There were no record-breaking profits. He could not afford a $30,000 luxury handbag if his life depended on it. My mother Vivica sat at the head of the table sipping her expensive champagne. She looked down her nose at me with a toxic mixture of disgust and performative motherly sorrow. She waited for the perfect moment, projecting her voice so the entire charity board and all the surrounding tables could hear her clear as day. Naomi always struggled, Vivica announced, sighing heavily as she placed a delicate hand against her chest. She lacked the fierce ambition from the very beginning. While Andre was out securing millions and building his tech empire, Naomi could barely manage a basic entry-level job. We had to cut her off 5 years ago to teach her tough love. We prayed it would build her character and teach her how to survive in the real world, but sadly, some people are just destined to remain at the bottom of the ladder. We can only hope she looks at this beautiful event today and finally learns something from Andre's brilliant example. The women at the table nodded in sympathetic agreement, murmuring quiet words of support to my mother for bearing the heavy burden of having such a deeply disappointing daughter. They looked at me with thinly veiled disdain, fully buying into the carefully crafted narrative that I was a bitter, jealous failure, trying to leech off my highly successful family. 5 years ago, being publicly humiliated like this, in front of the entire Atlanta social scene, would have completely destroyed me. I would have argued, cried, and desperately tried to defend my character to people who were committed to misunderstanding me. But today, sitting in my understated lethal luxury, I felt absolutely nothing but a cold, calculating thrill. I did not argue. I did not defend myself against their deeply humiliating lies. Lies I let them dig their graves as deep as they possibly could. I simply smiled, a polite, completely unbothered smile. I reached into my pocket, pulled out my highly encrypted smartphone, and rested my arms casually on the table. While Chantel continued to boast loudly to the women about her upcoming luxury vacations and Andre's fictional corporate mergers, I discreetly angled my phone camera. I snapped a crystal-clear, high-definition photograph of Chantel's $30,000 Birkin bag sitting triumphantly on the table. Under the table, hidden from their arrogant view, I quickly opened my secure messaging application. I attached the image and texted it directly to Harrison Caldwell, my chief forensic accountant at Onyx Capital in New York. I typed a rapid, precise message. Harrison cross-referenced the purchase of this specific luxury item from the local Atlanta boutiques within the last 48 hours. Match the purchase amount against Andre's frozen corporate accounts and flag any anomalies immediately. Find out exactly where the funds for this bag originated. I set the phone face down on the table and calmly picked up my glass of sparkling water, taking a slow sip as Chantel continued her loud, toxic performance. She was completely unaware that the very foundation of her fake, glamorous life was currently being dismantled by my financial team in real time. Less than 2 minutes later, my phone vibrated silently against the tablecloth. I picked it up, shielding the bright screen from the prying eyes of the women sitting next to me. The reply from Harrison came instantly, delivering a piece of information so explosive it practically radiated heat through the device. Boss Harrison wrote his message concise and absolutely devastating. Andre did not buy that bag. His corporate accounts have been entirely empty for weeks. That exact $30,000 transaction was processed yesterday afternoon. It was purchased using funds illegally wired directly from your mother's nonprofit charity account. Chantel is embezzling. I read the text message twice, making sure I fully absorbed the sheer magnitude of the catastrophic felony she had just committed. They were sitting at a charity luncheon designed to raise funds for marginalized students at historically black colleges, actively flaunting a luxury handbag purchased with the very donations they were supposed to be collecting. It was not just a lie, it was a massive federal financial crime. I locked my phone and slid it back into my pocket. I looked across the table at Chantel, who was laughing loudly, her hand resting proudly on the stolen leather bag. Then I looked at Vivica, who was still basking in the glow of her fake philanthropic socialite image. They thought they had successfully humiliated me. They thought they had won the social war. They had absolutely no idea that I was about to burn their entire toxic kingdom straight to the very ground. The flight to Atlanta was swift and completely silent. We took my private jet, a sleek Gulfstream that cut through the clouds, while I reviewed the financial dossiers Isaiah had prepared. By Friday evening, Isaiah and I stepped out of a sleek black town car and onto the brightly lit valet driveway of the most exclusive country club in Buckhead. This was the annual Heritage Charity Gala, an event where the elite of Atlanta gathered to flaunt their wealth, secure backroom corporate deals, and maintain their pristine social images. For the Pierce family, attendance at this specific event was absolutely mandatory. I knew exactly where to find them. I had dressed for absolute warfare. While my mother and sister-in-law favored flashy designer logos and ostentatious diamonds that screamed for public attention, I wore a custom-tailored emerald silk gown. It lacked a recognizable brand logo, but commanded the kind of quiet, lethal luxury that only true, unimaginable wealth could buy. Isaiah stood tall beside me in a perfectly cut midnight blue tuxedo. We moved through the crowded, opulent ballroom like shadows, slipping past the local politicians and real estate moguls who used to treat me like an invisible prop in the background of my father's life. It did not take long for them to spot me. I was standing near the grand archway leading to the catering kitchens, sipping sparkling water, when the Pierce family formation descended upon us. Desmond led the charge, his jaw tight and his posture completely rigid. Vivica flanked his left side, her eyes scanning my dress with immediate predatory calculation, trying to figure out if I had rented it for the night. Andre sauntered closely behind them, exuding unearned confidence, while his wife Chantel clung tightly to his arm, holding a large glass of dark red wine. They quickly maneuvered and cornered me against the wall near the kitchen entrance, deliberately pushing me away from the high-profile guests. To them, I was still the disgraced poor daughter who belonged out of sight, grouped with the hired help. Naomi, my father, snapped, completely ignoring Isaiah, who was standing just a few feet away. I am glad you decided to show some common sense and fly down here. We do not have time for small talk. He reached into the inner pocket of his tailored tuxedo jacket and pulled out a thick, heavily redacted document. He shoved a high-end fountain pen toward my chest with aggressive force. Sign as a guarantor, he ordered, tapping a specific signature line on the last page. It is just a formality for a $5 million bridge loan. Your brother has secured this funding for his new tech firm, but the strict underwriters are requesting one additional family signature to clear the final compliance check. Sign it quickly so we can get back to entertaining our important guests. I looked down at the physical document. Large black marker lines covered the primary lender details and the collateral agreements. It was a blatant, sloppy attempt to hide the actual financial terms of the massive loan. I kept my hands firmly at my sides and looked back up at his demanding, impatient face. You want me to blindly guarantee a $5 million corporate loan for a failing company that has zero market traction? I asked, my voice completely level and devoid of any emotion. Andre stepped forward, chuckling loudly, as he aggressively adjusted the heavy gold Rolex on his wrist. It was a watch I knew my father had paid for after Andre maxed out his credit cards on a failed marketing campaign 2 years ago. Relax, little sis, Andre said, flashing his signature arrogant smile. Do not worry. I will throw you a 1% advisory fee so you can finally upgrade that cheap sedan you used to drive. Do not overthink the business side of things. You are just a mid-level analyst. You do not need to understand the complex financial engineering behind this merger. Just put your name on the dotted line. That cash should be more than enough for you to buy something reliable. Chantel let out a sharp, breathless laugh, leaning her head against Andre's shoulder like a devoted prize. You really should take the generous deal, Naomi, she sneered, looking me up and down with obvious disgust. A 1% fee is probably more money than you make in an entire year fetching coffee in New York City. You should be thanking Andre on your knees for throwing you a bone after you selfishly turned your back on this family. I looked at my brother, taking in his smug, entitled expression, and then shifted my steady gaze to my father, who was still holding the gold pen out like a weapon meant to break me. I remembered those rainy nights sleeping in that exact cheap sedan. They were mocking working 3 jobs just to keep myself afloat, while they threw lavish parties in Buckhead. They thought I was still that vulnerable, easily manipulated girl. I am not signing anything, I stated clearly, my voice carrying over the low hum of the gala music. And I am certainly not attaching my legal name to a heavily redacted financial document without having my corporate attorney review every single page. My father's face contorted with pure, unfiltered rage. You ungrateful little brat, he hissed, leaning in extremely close so the nearby kitchen waiters would not hear him screaming. You owe this family everything you have. I gave you the Pierce name. You will sign this paper right now, or I will make sure you never find a job in the financial sector again. I will completely ruin you. I am not signing it, Desmond. I repeated, purposely using his first name. It was the first time I had ever addressed him that way, and the blatant disrespect hit his massive ego like a physical blow. Before my father could explode into a louder rage, Chantel lunged forward. Her face was twisted in a vicious theatrical scowl. You actually think you are better than us? She practically shrieked, her voice suddenly loud enough to intentionally draw the attention of several wealthy guests standing nearby. You think you can just march back into Atlanta and act like you are somebody important? With a swift, calculated flick of her wrist, Chantel tilted her heavy wine glass forward. The dark, sticky burgundy liquid splashed directly onto the bodice of my emerald silk gown, staining the expensive fabric instantly. She did not even attempt to make the sudden motion look like an accident. Oh my goodness! Chantel gasped with fake exaggerated horror, speaking loudly to ensure the growing crowd of elite onlookers heard every single word she said. I am so terribly sorry. I guess I just tripped in my heels. But really, Naomi, what did you expect coming here tonight to extort your own family for cash? Whispers rapidly erupted around us. Dozens of eyes turned toward the kitchen archway, watching the drama unfold with eager fascination. Vivica immediately stepped into her highly practiced role as the deeply burdened matriarch. She placed a dramatic hand over her heart and looked at the audience of wealthy socialites with fake tears in her eyes. Please forgive my daughter, Vivica announced loudly, her tone dripping with manufactured pity. She has always struggled heavily with her mental health. She is the ungrateful runaway daughter who abandoned us 5 years ago, and now she shows up to our charity event trying to demand money from her highly successful brother. We have tried everything to help her, but some people simply refuse to be saved. They had orchestrated the entire public scene perfectly. They backed me into a corner, demanded my signature on a shady document, and when I refused, they publicly humiliated me to violently control the narrative. They wanted the elite of Atlanta to view me as a pathetic, unstable extortionist, ensuring that if I ever tried to speak out against them, absolutely no one in their circle would believe a word I said. Chantel smirked at me, a victorious, nasty gleam shining in her dark eyes. You really should leave, Naomi. Naomi, she whispered viciously under her breath. Get out of here before you embarrass yourself any further. I looked down at the dark red stains spreading across my beautiful gown. 5 years ago, this exact situation would have shattered my confidence entirely. I would have run out of the venue in tears, feeling completely worthless, broken, and deeply ashamed of my existence. But today I did not feel an ounce of shame or fear. I felt a cold, absolute, and terrifying clarity. I looked at Chantel, then at my mother, and finally at my father. I did not scream. I did not defend myself to the whispering crowd. I simply turned around and walked away, my head held high, my posture completely unbroken. Isaiah followed closely behind me, his sharp expression perfectly unreadable to the surrounding guests. We exited the loud, crowded ballroom and stepped out into the quiet, dimly lit valet corridor. The cool, refreshing night air of Atlanta washed over my face. I stood perfectly still for a moment, letting the heavy doors close behind us, completely blocking out the sound of the gala. Isaiah reached into the inside pocket of his tuxedo jacket and pulled out his highly encrypted tablet. He tapped the glowing screen a few times, his eyes scanning a stream of secure financial data that had just finished compiling. His law firm had been running a deep forensic background check on Andre's tech company ever since my mother made that demanding phone call to my office. I looked over at him, adjusting my stained dress. Did you get the hidden lender details that my father desperately tried to black out on that contract? I asked quietly. Isaiah looked up from his bright screen, a predatory, dangerous glint flashing in his eyes. They did not just bring you down here to intimidate you into signing a guarantee, Naomi. He said, his voice deadly serious and completely calm. They brought you here because they are desperately trying to cover their tracks and avoid federal prison. What do you mean? I asked, stepping closer to look at the glowing tablet in his hands. Isaiah turned the digital screen toward me so I could read the text. It displayed a highly confidential loan agreement from a predatory, ruthless shadow lender known in the industry as Vanguard Credit. At the very bottom of the final page, bold and perfectly clear, was my full legal name, Naomi Pierce. But I had never seen this official document in my entire life. They did not just ask you to sign the paperwork today. Naomi, Isaiah continued, pointing directly at the digital timestamp located on the finalized contract. He was already way too late for that strategy. Andre already forged your signature on the preliminary documents a week ago. The charity luncheon concluded with Chantel basking in the glow of stolen wealth, completely oblivious to the digital guillotine hanging directly over her head. I did not confront her. I played my part flawlessly, keeping my head down as I exited the pavilion, letting the elite women of Atlanta believe they had successfully shunned the family failure. The moment the tinted windows of my town car rolled up, the performance ended. I looked at Isaiah, who was already reviewing the encrypted files Harrison had sent over. It was time to execute the next phase of the operation. We needed them to believe they had absolute control over me. They needed to believe their intimidation tactics and the looming threat of federal wire fraud had entirely broken my spirit. Early the next morning, I initiated the deception. I stood outside the towering glass facade of Pierce Commercial Real Estate, my father's corporate headquarters, in the heart of downtown Atlanta. I had deliberately dressed down for this specific encounter, wearing a wrinkled trench coat and flat shoes, styling my hair to look disheveled and frantic. I needed to look exactly like the terrified, desperate woman they expected to see. I took a deep breath, channeling every ounce of anxiety I used to feel in their presence, and pushed through the heavy revolving doors. The executive suite on the top floor was a monument to Desmond Pierce's massive ego. Floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city he believed he owned. He sat behind a massive mahogany desk flanked by Andre, who was casually tossing a golf ball in the air, looking incredibly bored. Vivica sat on a white leather sofa in the corner sipping espresso. When I walked into the room, my shoulders intentionally slumped. Their collective expressions shifted into pure predatory triumph. They thought the runaway daughter had finally crawled back to beg for mercy. Naomi, my father, said, his voice echoing in the cavernous office. His tone was dripping with condescension. I see you finally decided to stop throwing childish tantrums and face reality. Sit down, we have business to handle. I sat in the uncomfortable guest chair facing his desk. I forced my hands to tremble slightly as I placed them in my lap. "I brought my lawyer," I said, my voice intentionally wavering, sounding small and defeated. Isaiah stepped into the room carrying a cheap scuffed leather briefcase we had specifically purchased for this charade. He adjusted his glasses, looking every bit the overworked, underpaid public defender they assumed I had married. Andre let out a loud, barking laugh, catching the golf ball and pointing it at Isaiah. "This is your legal representation, Naomi. He looks like he handles traffic tickets for a living. You really should have stayed in Atlanta. We could have set you up with someone who actually passed the bar exam on their first try." Isaiah completely ignored the insult, playing his role with absolute perfection. He opened his cheap briefcase and pulled out a stack of paper. "Mr. Pierce," Isaiah said, his voice mild and deferential, "my client is extremely distressed about the fraudulent signature on the Vanguard credit documents. If this loan defaults, she is facing severe federal charges." My father leaned forward, placing his elbows heavily on his desk. He looked at me with a cold, unforgiving glare. "This is exactly what happens when you step out of line, Naomi. This is what happens when you turn your back on your own blood. You wander out into the real world, and you fail. But because I am a generous man, and because this family protects its own, I am willing to manage this situation." He opened a drawer and pulled out a thick, legally binding non-disclosure agreement, tossing it across the desk toward me. "You are going to sign this NDA today. It strictly forbids you from ever mentioning the signature, the loan, or Andre's business practices to anyone, including the authorities. You will legally accept the liability. If the auditors come knocking, you will take the fall to protect your brother. You will tell them you signed it willingly, but forgot. In exchange, I will personally ensure the loan payments are made from my corporate accounts, so you do not actually see the inside of a prison cell." I looked down at the thick document, forcing a tear to well up in my eye. "But Dad," I whispered, letting my voice crack perfectly, "if I take the fall, my career is ruined. I will never work in finance again." Vivica scoffed from the sofa, loudly setting her espresso cup down. "Oh, please, Naomi, do not be overly dramatic. You barely have a career to begin with. You fetch coffee for a boutique firm in New York. Andre is building a tech empire. He is the future of the Pierce legacy. You taking this minor professional hit is the absolute least you can do after abandoning us. Consider it your belated contribution to the family." Desmond tapped the heavy contract. "Sign it, Naomi. You come crawling back to my city trying to embarrass us at our charity events, and now you expect me to clean up your mess. Sign the paperwork, accept the liability, and I will protect you. Refuse, and I will call the federal authorities myself and tell them my unstable daughter is trying to frame her successful brother for financial fraud. Who do you think they will believe? A prominent Atlanta real estate mogul, or a runaway holding a fake designer bag?" I looked at Isaiah, giving him the subtle prearranged signal. Isaiah stepped forward, pushing his glasses up his nose, acting nervous and intimidated by my father's booming authority. "Sir, if my client is going to sign this strict NDA and accept the liability, I must insist on adding a standard indemnity addendum to the final page. It simply states that if she takes the fall, your company guarantees her legal fees. It is a standard protective measure. I cannot let her sign without it." Desmond rolled his eyes, visibly annoyed by the inconvenience of dealing with a low-tier lawyer. "Fine," he snapped, waving his hand dismissively. "Add your little addendum. But make it fast. I have a tea time at the country club in 30 minutes and I am already sick of looking at her." Isaiah pulled a pre-printed addendum page from his scuffed briefcase and slid it under the NDA. He handed Desmond a pen. "I just need your authorizing signature here on the addendum to finalize the agreement, Mr. Pierce." Desmond grabbed the pen. He was so blinded by his own massive ego, so absolutely certain of his total dominance over me, that he did not even bother to read the fine print on the page Isaiah handed him. He just wanted to solidify his control and get back to his luxurious life. He scribbled his signature aggressively across the bottom line, sealing the agreement. He shoved the paperwork back toward us. "There. Now sign your portion, Naomi, and get out of my office. Do not ever contact Andre again. We will handle the loan." I picked up the pen. My hands were no longer shaking. I smoothly signed my name on the final line, completing the trap. I stood up from the guest chair, my posture instantly transforming from defeated and small to towering and absolute. The act was officially over. Isaiah collected the signed documents, slipping them safely into his briefcase. The mild, nervous demeanor completely vanished from his face, replaced by the cold, calculating expression of a ruthless corporate shark. What my father did not know, what his towering arrogance had prevented him from reading, was that the addendum he just authorized had absolutely nothing to do with my legal fees. Isaiah had brilliantly slipped in a catastrophic financial waiver. By signing that specific page, Desmond Pierce had just legally voluntarily waived his right to contest any future asset seizures by his creditors. He had legally surrendered his ability to fight back in court when the shadow lender came to collect. I looked at my father, who was already turning his attention to his computer monitor, completely dismissing my existence. "Thank you for your time, Desmond," I said, my voice ringing with sharp, crystalline authority. "I will be sure to keep this documentation safe." Andre scoffed, crossing his arms. "Yeah, you do that, loser. Have a safe flight back to your miserable little life. Try not to cry too much on the plane." Isaiah and I turned and walked out of the grand executive suite. The heavy glass doors sealed shut. Isaiah and I turned and walked out of the grand executive suite. The heavy glass doors sealed shut behind us. As we stepped into the private elevator and the doors began to close, the absolute silence was beautiful. We watched the floor numbers tick down, descending from the penthouse suite to the ground level. We had the signed waiver. We had the forged loan. We owned their debt, and we owned their collateral. The pieces were no longer just moving into place. The checkmate had been secured. Just as the elevator reached the grand lobby, my phone buzzed with an incoming secure message from Harrison Caldwell. I opened it and smiled. "Right on schedule," I said, showing the screen to Isaiah. Upstairs in the executive suite, Andre's phone began to ring frantically. While he was busy mocking me and gloating over his perceived victory, the real world was crashing down on his fraudulent tech empire. The email notifications flooded his inbox in rapid, terrifying succession. His primary venture capital investors, the ones keeping his fake company afloat, had just received an anonymous, highly detailed tip regarding his financial instability and erratic behavior. They were pulling their funding immediately. Andre had exactly 48 hours before his entire company went into total, irreversible bankruptcy. The countdown to their ultimate destruction had officially begun. The countdown to their ultimate destruction had officially begun. 48 hours later, Andre decided the best way to handle a massive impending corporate collapse was to throw a lavish party. It was a classic Pierce family maneuver. When the structural walls of your life are crumbling, buy more expensive paint and invite an audience. He rented a massive 3-story luxury yacht on Lake Lanier, inviting the absolute wealthiest tech investors, socialites, and digital influencers in the greater Atlanta area. The official reason for the exclusive event was to celebrate the highly anticipated launch of his new application update. The actual reason was pure, unadulterated desperation. He desperately needed to project an image of absolute financial invincibility to secure new capital before his company completely bled out in front of the entire city. Isaiah and I arrived just as the humid southern sun began to dip below the tree line, casting a rich golden reflection across the dark, choppy water of the lake. I wore a tailored ivory jumpsuit, striking a sharp, intentional contrast against the sea of overly sequenced cocktail dresses and flashy linen suits that crowded the deck. We boarded the vessel just as the massive twin engines roared to life. The atmosphere was incredibly thick with the smell of expensive champagne, loud hip-hop music vibrating through heavy speakers, and the hollow, superficial laughter of people desperately trying to prove their immense net worth to one another. I spotted Chantel almost immediately. She was holding court on the upper deck, sipping a tall mimosa and intentionally positioning her stolen Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag on the pristine white leather seating so that every single guest walking by was forced to notice it. She looked at me as I walked past, rolling her dark eyes and leaning in to whisper something toxic to her eager group of socialite friends. She genuinely believed she had won the ultimate social war. She thought I was only in attendance because I had completely capitulated to my father, signed the restrictive non-disclosure agreement, and submissively accepted the legal fallout for Andre's federal crimes. I let her enjoy the beautiful fantasy. Ignorance was the only luxury she truly possessed. Andre, however, did not look victorious. Underneath his custom-tailored blazer and his blinding, highly practiced smile, he was visibly sweating. I could see the frantic, terrified energy practically radiating off him from 20 feet away. His eyes darted constantly toward his smartphone, waiting for a financial lifeline that was absolutely never going to come. He was mingling aggressively with older established venture capitalists, loudly pitching his company's fake user metrics, desperately trying to secure a life raft before his sinking ship took on too much water. About an hour into the sunset cruise, the loud music suddenly faded out. Andre stepped up to a small, illuminated podium near the bow of the yacht, confidently grabbing a silver microphone. He raised his glass high in the air, demanding the undivided attention of the elite crowd. I want to thank everyone for coming out tonight to celebrate the undeniable, unstoppable future of Atlanta tech, he announced, his voice booming over the surround sound speakers. The wealthy crowd cheered loudly, completely oblivious to the fact that they were raising their glasses to toast a bankrupt corporate corpse. Andre scanned the attentive crowd and purposefully locked eyes with me. His smile turned sharp, vindictive, and intensely cruel. You know, building a massive tech empire is never a solo mission. He continued, projecting his voice so every single guest could hear his patronizing tone. It takes a strong family. And sometimes it takes a heavy dose of tough love to get your family in line. I want to give a very special shout out tonight to my little sister Naomi. Stand up, Naomi. Let the people see you. I did not stand up, but the judgmental eyes of the elite crowd instantly turned toward me anyway. Naomi has finally learned the true value of loyalty. Andre mocked, his tone dripping with patronizing venom. She finally learned her proper place in this family and realized that the absolute best thing she can do is stand back, stay quiet, and contribute to the real genius in the room. Let us get a loud round of applause for the supporting cast. A smattering of polite, incredibly awkward applause rippled through the gathered guests. Vivica, standing proudly near the open bar, beamed with absolute pride, raising her crystal glass to her golden boy. Desmond gave a stern, heavily approving nod from the VIP section. They were actively, intentionally humiliating me, trying to cement my role as the subservient, defeated daughter who existed solely to prop up her vastly superior brother. I simply raised my glass of sparkling water, offering Andre a cold, totally unbothered smile. I knew exactly what was sitting in his inbox, and I knew exactly what was about to happen. Once the arrogant speech ended and the loud, pulsing music resumed, I watched Andre quickly slip away from the main deck. He headed down the narrow, carpeted stairs toward the private VIP cabins below the waterline. I gave Isaiah a knowing look. He nodded silently, positioning his broad frame near the top of the staircase to ensure we were not interrupted by any wandering guests. I followed my older brother down into the quiet, dimly lit hull of the luxury yacht. Andre was pacing aggressively back and forth in the master suite, furiously typing on his phone. He looked up when I entered the room and immediately scowled, his fake public charm completely vanishing. "What do you want, Naomi?" he snapped angrily, shoving his phone deep into his blazer pocket. "Did you come down here to beg for that 1% advisory fee I promised you at the country club? Because you are going to have to wait a while. All of my cash flow is temporarily tied up in the new platform launch. I came down here to give you one final warning, Andre," I said, leaning casually against the heavy wooden doorframe blocking his only exit. "Stop this pathetic charade. Cancel the party right now. Go upstairs and tell these investors the absolute truth about your failing company. Call Dad and tell him the truth about the Vanguard credit loan and the forged signatures. If you stop right now and confess to your crimes, you might actually survive the impending legal fallout." Andre stared at me in total silence for a brief second before bursting into a loud, incredibly mocking laugh. He walked aggressively toward me, his chest puffed out with toxic, fragile bravado. "Are you completely out of your mind?" he sneered, getting uncomfortably close to my face, the smell of expensive bourbon rolling off his breath. "You really think you can come on my yacht, drink my champagne, and give me business advice? You are a massive loser, Naomi. You have always been a loser. You fetch coffee for executives in New York. I run the city of Atlanta. You just pay the bills for my success. You are running on empty fumes, Andre. I replied, my voice dangerously calm and unwavering. Your primary venture capital investors pulled their funding 48 hours ago. You are completely broke. You cannot even afford to pay the catering staff on this boat. His face flushed a deep, angry crimson. A flash of genuine, unadulterated panic crossed his features before he aggressively masked it with raw anger. You do not know anything about my private finances, he hissed, pointing a shaking finger at my chest. You signed the legal paperwork in Dad's office. You willingly took the liability. You are the one who goes down to federal prison if anything happens to that loan. You just pay for my success. Now get out of my private cabin before I have my security team throw you off my boat. I did not move an inch. I just looked at him with absolute terrifying pity. It is not your boat, Andre. Andre, I whispered softly. You rented it, just like you rented your entire fake life. Before he could scream at me again, his cell phone began to ring loudly in the quiet enclosed cabin. It was a harsh, sharp, demanding sound that cut right through his toxic arrogance. He pulled the device out of his pocket, his face rapidly draining of all color when he saw the caller ID flashing on the screen. It was Vanguard Credit, the ruthless shadow lender. He answered the call quickly, his hands trembling slightly as he tried desperately to maintain his arrogant, commanding tone. I already told your representative I needed a standard extension until Tuesday morning. Andre barked into the receiver, pacing away from me. The bridge loan is completely guaranteed by my father's premium commercial properties and my sister's verified signature. You need to back off and give me space to secure my new investors. I watched in absolute unbroken silence as the voice on the other end of the line delivered the fatal, crushing blow. I knew exactly what my chief financial officer, Harrison Caldwell, was saying to him because I had personally scripted the entire message word for word. Andre's eyes widened in sheer, unadulterated terror. The color completely vanished from his face. He dropped his crystal glass of champagne. It shattered violently against the polished hardwood floor, sending expensive alcohol pooling around his designer shoes. What do you mean the grace period is officially rejected? Andre gasped, his voice cracking horribly, the arrogant tech CEO facade completely shattering into a million pathetic pieces. You cannot call in a $5 million loan immediately. That is highly illegal. We have an agreement. I demand to speak to your board of directors right now. I took a slow, deliberate step forward, crushing a large piece of shattered glass beneath my expensive heel. The sharp cracking sound echoed loudly. They do not have a board of directors anymore, Andre. I said, my voice echoing with lethal corporate authority. Andre slowly lowered the phone from his ear, staring at me as if he were looking at a terrifying ghost. He was breathing heavily, his chest heaving with absolute panic. They said the new owner of the firm is rejecting all previous terms, he whispered, his entire body visibly shaking. They are demanding the $5 million right now, plus $3 million in immediate non-negotiable default penalties, or they are legally seizing Dad's commercial properties by tomorrow morning. I smiled, the cold, ruthless, unstoppable energy of Onyx Capital radiating through my veins. I looked my broken brother dead in his panicked eyes. I told you, Andre. I do not just pay for your success. I own your failures. I turned on my heel and walked out of the master cabin. I left Andre standing in a puddle of expensive champagne and shattered glass. His chest heaved with frantic, shallow breaths as his entire artificial reality collapsed around him. Isaiah followed me up the narrow staircase. We emerged back onto the main deck of the yacht, where the loud music continued to pulse and the elite guests continued to laugh completely, oblivious to the catastrophic financial ruin that had just occurred right beneath their feet. We disembarked at the private marina without saying a single word to anyone. The trap was sprung. Now we just had to wait for the venom to circulate through the rest of the family. The implosion happened precisely at 9 o'clock on Monday morning. I was sitting at the massive marble dining table in my hotel penthouse, enjoying a quiet cup of artisanal coffee while Isaiah reviewed real estate deeds. My encrypted phone vibrated against the cool stone surface. It was Harrison Caldwell, updating me directly from the trading floor at Onyx Capital in New York. The seizure notices had been formally served to Desmond Pierce's corporate headquarters. The legal machinery was officially in motion. Across town, in the towering glass structure of Pierce Commercial Real Estate, sheer panic was tearing through the executive suite. I had authorized my financial team to send a team of highly aggressive corporate auditors directly to the building. Desmond, operating under his usual towering arrogance, initially tried to have them thrown out by building security. He thought he could simply yell his way out of a federal contract default. When the lead auditor handed him the legally binding default notice, highlighting the exact clause that authorized the immediate seizure of his three prime Buckhead properties, my father realized yelling would not save him. He immediately contacted his primary wealth manager at a prestigious Atlanta bank. Desmond planned to do what he had always done. He intended to leverage his remaining unencumbered real estate assets to secure an emergency line of credit. He needed $8 million in liquid cash instantly to pay off Vanguard credit bailout, Andre, and protect his crown jewel properties from being auctioned off. He stormed into the bank demanding special treatment and VIP access. His wealth manager sat him down in a quiet, heavily soundproofed office and delivered the crushing reality. Desmond could not leverage a single brick of his remaining empire. The bank could not issue him a loan because his entire portfolio was locked. When Desmond blindly signed the addendum to the non-disclosure agreement in his office, the one Isaiah had brilliantly drafted, he had legally waived his right to contest any asset seizures. Furthermore, the cross-collateralization clauses buried in Andre's original forged loan meant that defaulting triggered a universal freeze on all connected assets. Desmond Pierce, the untouchable real estate titan of Atlanta, was entirely cut off from his own money. By noon, the financial desperation had morphed into toxic, misdirected rage. My phone rang violently. The caller ID flashed my mother's name. I answered it, placing the device on speaker so Isaiah could listen to the impending meltdown. "Naomi, you need to get over to our house right this second," Vivica shrieked through the speaker. Her voice was shrill, completely stripped of its usual curated high society polish. "Your father is having chest pains. The bank just locked his accounts because of that shady lender you got involved with. You brought this curse into our family. Get over here now and fix it." Isaiah and I shared a dark, knowing look. They still had absolutely no idea that I was the owner of the firm, dismantling their lives. They genuinely believed I was just a victim of bad luck and that my mere presence had drawn the attention of aggressive creditors. I agreed to meet them, eager to watch their sheer audacity unfold in person. When I arrived at the massive Buckhead mansion, the atmosphere was chaotic. Andre was pacing the length of the grand foyer, chewing his fingernails, looking completely unhinged. His designer suit was wrinkled and he had clearly not slept. Desmond sat heavily in a velvet armchair, his face pale and slick with nervous sweat. Vivica paced behind him, wringing her hands together. "You did this," Andre yelled the moment I walked through the massive double doors. "You jinxed us. You signed that paperwork wrong, or you tipped off the lender, or you did something to trigger this immediate default. You have always been nothing but bad luck for me." I stood calmly in the center of the foyer, holding my leather handbag. "You forged my signature, Andre," I replied, my voice steady and cold. "You defaulted on a $5 million loan. Your complete lack of business acumen is not my bad luck. It is your own staggering incompetence." Desmond slammed his hand against the armrest of his chair, struggling to project his usual dominant authority. "Shut up, both of you," he barked, though his voice lacked its normal booming resonance. "Naomi, the bank has frozen my accounts due to the legal clauses in that damn addendum you made me sign. We have 48 hours before the shadow lender begins liquidating my commercial plazas. We need $3 million in liquid cash today to pay the immediate default penalties and buy us time to restructure." I looked at my father, tilting my head slightly. "And where do you suggest we find $3 million in liquid cash?" Desmond, I asked. Vivica stepped forward, her eyes wide with frantic, entitled desperation. "You are going to empty your retirement accounts, Naomi. You have been working in corporate finance for years. You must have a massive 401k and extensive stock portfolios. You are going to liquidate all of your personal savings and transfer the cash to your father immediately." I stared at my mother, absorbing the sheer magnitude of her toxic audacity. "You want me to completely destroy my own financial future empty my retirement accounts, and hand over my entire life savings to pay the penalty for a loan my brother secured by committing federal identity theft against me. It is the least you can do, Vivica snapped, pointing an accusing finger at my face. This is your fault for bringing your cheap, incompetent lawyer husband into our business affairs. You owe this family. You will empty those accounts today, or I swear I will make sure every single person in Atlanta knows what a selfish, traitorous daughter you are. I let out a soft, dark laugh. The sound echoed off the high, vaulted ceilings of their extravagant mansion. You cannot afford to threaten me anymore, Mother, I said, turning my back on them. I am not giving you a single dime. You can figure out how to save your golden boy on your own. I walked out of the house, leaving them screaming my name in the grand foyer. Their delusions of control were finally cracking. While the Pierce family tore each other apart in the living room, a much quieter, far more insidious panic was unfolding upstairs. Chantel was hiding in her expansive master suite, gripping her phone with trembling hands. She had overheard the entire screaming match from the balcony landing. She knew Desmond's assets were frozen. She knew Andre's company was completely bankrupt. The limitless flow of Pierce family money, the very reason she had married Andre and tolerated his arrogant behavior, had suddenly evaporated. Chantel was a status-obsessed survivor. She knew exactly what happens when high society families lose their wealth. The luxury cars get quietly repossessed in the middle of the night. The country club memberships are revoked. The exclusive invitations stop arriving. She refused to go down with the sinking ship. She needed a golden parachute, and she needed it immediately. She walked over to her extensive walk-in closet, bypassing rows of designer shoes and silk dresses, and pulled a sleek silver laptop from a hidden safe. This was not her personal computer. It was the device she used to manage the administrative tasks for Vivica's historically black college charity foundation. Vivica had foolishly given Chantel full administrative access to the charity banking portals years ago, believing her daughter-in-law was simply helping with event logistics. Chantel logged into the secure banking portal, her heart pounding furiously against her ribs. She saw the massive balance sitting in the charity account. Over $400,000 in generous donations from wealthy Atlanta philanthropists. Money meant for scholarships, community outreach, and university grants. Chantel did not care about marginalized students or community support. She only cared about maintaining her lavish lifestyle. Her perfectly manicured fingers flew across the keyboard. She navigated to the wire transfer section of the portal. She had recently set up a private, untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands for exactly this type of emergency. She typed in the routing numbers, her hands shaking so badly she had to retype the sequence twice. She entered the transfer amount, intending to drain every single cent from the charity fund. $395,000. She prepared to hit the final authorization button, believing she was pulling off the perfect untraceable escape. She had absolutely no idea that her every digital move was being monitored. Back in my penthouse suite, I was sitting comfortably on the velvet sofa, a glass of iced lemon water in my hand. Isaiah sat beside me, balancing his highly encrypted laptop on his knees. Earlier that week, when my forensic accountant Harrison had first flagged Chantel's illegal purchase of the $30,000 Birkin bag, I had instructed my cybersecurity team to act. They did not just monitor the transaction. They had quietly and flawlessly cloned the administrative server of Vivica's charity foundation. Every single keystroke Chantel made on that banking portal was instantly mirrored onto Isaiah's screen in real time. I watched the digital numbers flash across the dark screen. I watched her enter the offshore routing information. I watched her type in the massive transfer amount, attempting to steal hundreds of thousands of dollars from disadvantaged students just to save her own superficial skin. She is initiating the final wire transfer right now, Isaiah murmured, his eyes locked on the scrolling data. She is trying to drain the entire foundation account. She is making her run for it. I leaned forward, resting my chin on my hand. I stared at the blinking green authorization button mirrored on our screen. Chantel had spent years belittling me, mocking my modest clothes, and trying to destroy my reputation among the Atlanta elite. She thought she was a brilliant manipulator. She was about to learn that she was nothing but a clumsy thief playing in a billionaire's arena. "Do it," I commanded softly. Isaiah did not hesitate. His finger tapped heavily on a single key. He executed a custom security override protocol that our tech team had embedded into the cloned server. Miles away in the Buckhead mansion, Chantel clicked the transfer button, holding her breath, waiting for the confirmation screen that would guarantee her wealthy escape. Instead, her screen abruptly flashed bright, blinding red. A massive, unavoidable warning banner locked her entire computer system. I sat back in my plush suite, a cold, triumphant smile spreading across my face as I read the exact text we had hard-coded to appear on her screen. Account frozen, due to suspected federal fraud. Law enforcement has been notified. Chantel stared at the glaring red text, illuminating her darkened master suite. The massive offshore transfer she thought would be her golden parachute had just transformed into her concrete burial shoes. She slammed the laptop shut, her breathing erratic and incredibly shallow. She was completely paralyzed by the realization that her luxurious escape plan was dead. She had nowhere to run. Her lavish lifestyle built entirely on theft and deception was imploding in real time. Meanwhile, the real corporate bloodbath was just beginning downtown. By 8 o'clock the next morning, Desmond Pierce had convened an emergency off-the-books meeting in the grand executive boardroom of Pierce Commercial Real Estate. The massive glass-walled room overlooked the sprawling Atlanta skyline, a city my father genuinely believed he controlled with an iron fist. He sat at the head of the long mahogany table, flanked by his chief operating officer, his lead corporate counsel, and Andre. Andre looked physically ill, his hands shaking violently as he clutched a lukewarm cup of black coffee. His tech startup was officially bankrupt. His investors had fled the sinking ship, and he was currently hiding behind our father's rapidly fading power. Desmond slammed his hand against the polished wood, demanding absolute silence from his panicked executives. The room grew instantly quiet, thick with toxic tension. "We are not filing for bankruptcy!" Desmond barked, his voice rough and laced with sheer desperation. "We are not losing the Buckhead retail plazas to some faceless shadow lender. I built this empire from the ground up, and I will not let a minor cash flow issue destroy my entire legacy. We just need $3 million in liquid capital to pay the immediate default penalties and secure a new restructuring agreement with Vanguard Credit." His chief operating officer, a nervous man named Arthur, cleared his throat, hesitantly adjusting his tie. "Sir, our operating accounts are completely frozen. The bank refuses to authorize any outgoing wires. We simply do not have $3 million in liquid cash available anywhere in the portfolio." Desmond glared at him with cold, terrifying authority. "Then we use the commercial tenant escrow accounts." Desmond ordered his tone, leaving absolutely no room for debate. "We have over $10 million sitting in security deposits across our southeastern portfolio. Drain $3 million from those accounts and wire it to Vanguard immediately." The corporate counsel immediately sat up straight, his face draining of all color. "Mr. Pierce, that is highly illegal. Commingling or liquidating tenant security deposits to cover personal corporate debt is a direct violation of federal real estate law. If the regulatory agencies find out, we will all face severe criminal charges. We cannot authorize that transfer." "Do it!" Desmond roared, standing up and leaning aggressively over the massive table. "I am the founder of this company. I make the rules. When the new quarterly rents come in next month, we will quietly replenish the escrow accounts, and no one will ever know the difference. Transfer the money right now, or I will fire every single one of you and find a team that actually knows how to follow instructions." The executives exchanged terrified, trapped glances. They were entirely dependent on Desmond's wealth and influence, and they were about to cross a devastating legal line just to appease his towering, fragile ego. Before the terrified chief operating officer could even touch his laptop to initiate the illegal transfer, the heavy double doors of the grand boardroom swung wide open. I walked into the room, my heels clicking sharply against the polished marble floor. I wore a tailored crimson power suit that commanded immediate, undeniable attention. Isaiah walked closely behind me, carrying a thick black leather folder. "We did not ask for permission to enter. We simply claimed the space-projecting absolute authority." Desmond froze, his eyes widening in pure, unadulterated fury when he saw me standing there. The veins in his neck bulged against his expensive silk tie. "What the hell are you doing in my building?" Desmond shouted, his voice echoing violently off the glass walls. "I told you never to show your face around me again unless you were bringing me cash. You do not hold a seat at this table. Get out of my boardroom before I have you physically thrown out onto the street." He aggressively mashed the intercom button on his desk, shouting for the head of building security to come up to the executive floor immediately to handle a trespasser. I did not flinch. I did not retreat. I slowly walked directly toward the head of the table, my posture radiating absolute lethal calm. I stopped just a few feet away from my father, looking down at his panicked red face. "The head of security is not coming, Desmond," I said, my voice smooth and perfectly controlled. "I just relieved him of his duties downstairs. Along with your receptionist, your personal driver, and the entire human resources department. They work for me now." Andre scoffed loudly from his seat, rolling his eyes in blatant disbelief. "You are completely psychotic, Naomi," he sneered, trying to mask his overwhelming panic with toxic arrogance. "You cannot fire anyone here. You are just a bitter, broke loser trying to cause a scene because Dad finally cut you off. Call the police, Dad. Have her arrested for trespassing right now." I ignored my brother entirely. I looked at the terrified executives sitting around the table who were watching this family meltdown with wide, horrified eyes. "Arthur," I said, addressing the chief operating officer directly, "do not initiate that escrow transfer. If you touch a single cent of those tenant deposits, I will personally ensure you are named as a co-conspirator in the federal indictment my legal team is currently drafting. Step away from the computer immediately." Arthur instantly pulled his hands away from his laptop as if the keyboard had caught fire. Desmond slammed his fist on the table again, absolutely losing his mind with rage. "You do not give orders in my company," Desmond roared, pointing a shaking finger directly at my face. "You are nothing. You have nothing. I built this empire with my own two hands. This is my table." Isaiah stepped forward with graceful, predatory confidence. He placed the thick black leather folder squarely in the center of the mahogany table. He slid it directly toward Desmond. I placed my hands on the cool, polished wood and leaned forward, looking my father dead in his eyes. "No, Desmond," I whispered, my voice cutting through his screaming like a razor blade. "I own the table." Desmond stared at me, his chest heaving with furious, shallow breaths. He snatched the black folder off the table and ripped it open fully, expecting to see a fake document or a meaningless, frivolous lawsuit. Instead, he found highly certified, notarized corporate acquisition papers bearing the official seal of the Securities and Exchange Commission. Isaiah adjusted his glasses, his tone shifting into a sharp, unforgiving legal cadence that commanded the entire room. "Let me explain the new reality of your situation," Mr. Pierce, Isaiah stated clearly. 2 days ago, Onyx Capital, a multi-billion-dollar private equity firm based in New York, executed a hostile takeover of Vanguard Credit. They completely absorbed all of Vanguard's assets, liabilities, and outstanding loan portfolios. Andre's face drained of all remaining color. He slumped back in his leather chair, his mouth hanging open in sheer terror. Isaiah continued, mercilessly delivering the final crushing blow. "Your son Andre secured a $5 million loan from Vanguard using a forged signature. When he defaulted on that loan, Vanguard had the legal right to seize the collateral backing the agreement. You, Desmond, put up your controlling shares of Pierce Commercial Real Estate as that collateral. And because you arrogantly signed an addendum waiving your right to contest any asset seizures, the transfer of ownership was executed instantly upon default." Desmond's eyes darted frantically across the legal documents, his hands trembling violently as he read the ironclad clauses he had foolishly ignored in his office just days prior. "Onyx Capital seized your collateral yesterday morning," Isaiah concluded, his voice ringing with absolute finality. "They now legally own 60% of Pierce Commercial Real Estate. They are the majority shareholders. You no longer have controlling interest in this firm. You do not have the authority to liquidate assets, authorize transfers, or give orders to these executives." Desmond looked up from the papers, his face a mask of pure, unadulterated horror. He looked at me, his mind desperately trying to connect the catastrophic dots. But you, he stammered, his booming voice reduced to a pathetic, breathy whisper. What does Onyx Capital have to do with you? I smiled, the cold, triumphant energy of a 5-year revenge plan, finally reaching its absolute pinnacle. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Onyx Capital, I announced, projecting my voice so every single executive in the room could hear the undeniable truth. I am the shadow lender. I am the distressed debt buyer. I am the one who currently holds the deed to your Buckhead mansion, the titles to your commercial plazas, and the majority voting rights of this very board. You told me 5 years ago that I did not belong in this family unless I invested in my brother. Well, Desmond, consider me fully invested. The sheer crushing weight of reality slammed into Desmond Pierce with the force of a freight train. The towering, arrogant real estate tycoon suddenly gasped for air. He dropped the legal documents, his hands flying to his chest as a sharp, sudden pain seized his heart. He collapsed heavily back into his leather executive chair, wheezing and clutching his tailored suit, completely paralyzed by the utter destruction of his entire life's work. The executives jumped up in a panic, but Andre exploded. He leaped out of his chair, his face twisted in a vicious, desperate rage. He pointed a shaking finger at me, screaming at the top of his lungs. "This is illegal!" Andre shrieked, kicking his chair backward. "You cannot do this! You manipulated us! You set a trap! I will hire the best corporate lawyers in the country. I will tie you up in litigation for the next decade. I will sue you for everything you have." Isaiah stepped smoothly in front of me, effortlessly blocking Andre's aggressive path. He reached inside his breast pocket and pulled out a crisp white envelope. He slapped it hard against Andre's chest. Andre instinctively grabbed it, looking down in complete confusion. "You can try to sue us," Isaiah said, a cold, mocking smile illuminating his sharp features. "But it is going to be incredibly difficult to meet with your highly paid corporate lawyers." Isaiah leaned in close, his voice dropping to a deadly, terrifying whisper. "You cannot sue anyone from federal prison, Andre." The silence in the grand executive boardroom was absolute and terrifying. Andre stared down at the crisp white federal subpoena resting against his chest, his arrogant, entitled sneer entirely replaced by a mask of suffocating, paralyzing dread. The color completely drained from his face as his eyes frantically scanned the official government seal. He dropped the document onto the mahogany table as if it were burning his skin. Desmond remained slumped in his oversized executive chair, his breathing ragged and shallow, his hand still gripping the lapel of his tailored suit. The executives who had been sitting around the table quietly gathered their briefcases and slipped out of the glass-walled room without uttering a single word. They recognized instantly that the Pierce Empire had just been formally and legally decapitated. I did not offer my father or my brother a single ounce of sympathy. I turned on my heel and walked out of the room with Isaiah right behind me, leaving them to suffocate in the toxic, inescapable reality they had created for themselves. By the time Isaiah and I returned to our hotel penthouse, the Pierce family survival instincts had morphed into aggressive, blinding delusion. Later that afternoon, Harrison Caldwell intercepted a frantic conference call between my father, Andre, and my mother. We sat in the quiet luxury of our suite, listening to the audio feed, as Vivica aggressively spun a narrative of sheer, unadulterated denial. She paced the hardwood floors of their Buckhead mansion, vehemently convincing her husband and son that the entire morning had been nothing but a highly coordinated, elaborate bluff. "Naomi does not have billions of dollars!" Vivica shrieked through the intercepted audio, her voice thick with desperate arrogance. "She is a glorified accountant who fetches coffee. That cheap lawyer she married probably printed those fake securities and exchange commission documents at a local copy shop just to scare us. It is an intimidation tactic. They know Andre is on the verge of a massive tech breakthrough, and they want us to panic and hand over the company for pennies. We are not giving them a single dime." Desmond, severely weakened by the morning's confrontation, but desperately needing to maintain his towering ego, latched onto my mother's toxic delusion like a lifeline. He convinced himself that Onyx Capital was just a shell company designed to extort him. Instead of calling his independent legal team to verify the hostile takeover, he made a catastrophic, ego-driven decision. He decided to double down on their public image. He and Vivica agreed to proceed with their massively expensive, highly publicized 35th anniversary gala that coming weekend. They planned to gather the absolute wealthiest real estate developers, politicians, and socialites in Atlanta under one roof. They intended to publicly announce a fake corporate merger to calm the nerves of their fleeing investors and project an image of absolute financial invincibility. It was the ultimate pathetic masquerade. While my family wasted their rapidly dwindling hours picking out designer tuxedos and ordering imported caviar for their fake celebration, I was sitting in a highly secure windowless briefing room at the Federal Building in downtown Atlanta. I sat across a cold steel table from two senior agents assigned to the Federal Bureau of Investigation Economic Crimes Division. Isaiah sat beside me, sliding a heavily encrypted hard drive across the table toward the lead agent. I did not just want to seize my father's commercial real estate portfolio. Taking their money was simply a financial transaction. I wanted to completely dismantle the toxic, abusive legacy they had used to destroy people for decades. I looked the lead federal agent directly in the eyes, my posture radiating absolute authority. The hard drive contains irrefutable time-stamped digital evidence of massive corporate wire fraud committed by Andre Pierce, I stated clearly, my voice echoing in the stark room. It includes the forged signature documents used to secure a $5 million loan across state lines. Additionally, you will find cloned server logs detailing an attempted offshore wire transfer of nearly $400,000. The funds were actively being embezzled from a registered nonprofit charity account by his wife, Chantel Pierce. They were stealing donations meant for marginalized college students to fund their luxury lifestyle. The federal agents plugged the drive into their secure terminal. They watched the digital records load, their expressions hardening as the sheer magnitude of the financial felonies became undeniable. The paper trail was absolutely flawless. My cybersecurity team had tracked every single IP address, every forged digital signature, and every illegal bank routing number. The evidence was bulletproof. The lead agent closed his laptop and looked at me, a sharp, respectful understanding passing between us. We have enough evidence here to secure immediate federal arrest warrants for both individuals. The agent confirmed, pulling a fresh legal pad toward him to finalize the operational logistics. Where do you suggest we execute the apprehensions to ensure they do not attempt to flee the jurisdiction? I smiled, the cold, calculating thrill of the final checkmate settling deep into my bones. My parents are hosting their 35th anniversary gala this Saturday night at a private estate in Buckhead, I replied smoothly. Every major political figure and socialite in the city will be in attendance. I highly suggest you execute the warrants there. The Atlanta elite deserve to see exactly who they have been blindly funding all these years. Saturday evening arrived with suffocating southern humidity, but the atmosphere inside the sprawling historic Buckhead estate was perfectly climate-controlled and dripping with excessive unearned wealth. Desmond and Vivica had spared absolutely no expense for their grand illusion. Crystal chandeliers cast a warm golden glow over the massive ballroom. Waiters in crisp white uniforms circulated smoothly through the crowd, carrying silver trays loaded with vintage champagne and expensive hors d'oeuvres. A live jazz band played softly in the corner, creating an ambience of sophisticated old money. My parents stood near the grand entrance, greeting the arriving socialites with blinding, highly practiced smiles. Desmond looked sharp in a bespoke tuxedo, though the slight tremor in his hands betrayed his underlying panic. Vivica wore a dazzling silver gown projecting the image of the flawless matriarch. They looked like the undisputed king and queen of Atlanta, completely ignoring the terrifying fact that their entire kingdom had been legally seized days ago. Andre and Chantel mingled near the open bar, laughing loudly and pretending they were not standing on the precipice of federal indictment. Isaiah and I arrived 30 minutes late, making a deliberate, highly visible entrance. I wanted them to feel the shift in the room the moment I stepped through the doors. I wore a stunning floor-length obsidian velvet gown that absorbed the light in the room, radiating an aura of absolute, undisputed power. Isaiah looked dangerous and incredibly sharp in a tailored black suit. We walked down the grand sweeping staircase toward the main ballroom floor, drawing the immediate attention of the whispering elite. Vivica saw me first. Her fake smile faltered for a fraction of a second before she quickly recovered, leaning in to whisper something frantic to Desmond. They had intentionally excluded my name from the guest list, but the security team outside had immediately recognized Isaiah and waved us through without a single question. I did not look at my parents. I did not acknowledge my brother or his wife. I simply glided onto the ballroom floor, projecting the serene, untouchable confidence of a woman who held their entire existence in the palm of her hand. Desmond puffed out his chest, attempting to ignore my presence and focus on his wealthy investors. He needed this night to go perfectly. He needed the elite of Atlanta to validate his massive ego and buy into his fake merger announcement. Suddenly, a ripple of excited murmurs swept through the opulent ballroom. The heavy oak doors of the grand entrance swung wide open. The governor of Georgia had arrived. He was accompanied by a small, highly professional security detail. His presence at the anniversary gala represented the ultimate political validation my parents desperately craved. Having the state executive attend their event was the exact type of social currency Desmond needed to convince his panicked investors that the Pierce family was still incredibly powerful and politically connected. Desmond immediately abandoned his conversation with a local real estate developer. He smoothed his tie and strode eagerly across the polished marble floor, a wide, victorious smile plastered across his face. He extended his right hand warmly, fully expecting to greet the governor and pose for the flashing cameras of the local society photographers. He wanted everyone in the room to witness his immense political influence. But the governor did not even look at my father. He completely bypassed Desmond's outstretched hand, walking straight past the humiliated real estate tycoon as if Desmond were nothing more than a random waiter holding a tray. The entire ballroom fell into a stunned, absolute silence. Desmond stood frozen in the middle of the floor, his hand still awkwardly suspended in the air, his face flushing a deep, embarrassed crimson. The governor continued walking with purpose, his security detail trailing closely behind him. He stopped directly in front of me. The most powerful political figure in the state offered a deep, highly respectful bow before warmly extending his hand to mine. "It is an absolute honor to finally meet you in person," Madam CEO. The governor said, his voice carrying clearly across the dead-silent ballroom. "Your firm's recent investments in our state infrastructure are truly unprecedented." The entire ballroom held its collective breath. The clinking of crystal glasses ceased entirely. The soft jazz music playing in the background suddenly sounded aggressively loud against the deafening, shocked silence of the Atlanta elite. I looked at the governor of Georgia, my expression remaining perfectly serene, completely unaffected by the monumental political weight of his greeting. "The pleasure is entirely mine, Governor," I replied smoothly, accepting his handshake with a firm, professional grip. Onyx Capital is deeply committed to the growth and development of the greater Atlanta area. We believe in building sustainable futures, which often requires clearing away the decaying, unstable structures of the past. I purposely locked eyes with my father as I delivered that final sentence. Desmond looked as though he had just been struck by lightning. The veins in his neck pulsed violently against his tight, heavily starched collar. His brain simply could not process the reality unfolding right in front of his face. He aggressively shoved his way past a prominent federal judge to insert himself directly into our conversation. "Governor, there must be some massive, embarrassing misunderstanding here," Desmond stammered, attempting to force his signature booming, authoritative laugh, though it sounded incredibly hollow and desperate. "This young woman is my estranged daughter, Naomi. She is certainly not the chief executive of any major investment firm. She works at a boutique accounting desk in New York. Whoever fed your office this information has made a terrible, highly humiliating mistake." The governor pulled his hand away from mine and turned slowly to look at Desmond. His polite political smile completely vanished, replaced by an expression of cold, unyielding, aristocratic disdain. "There is no mistake," Desmond the governor stated, his tone dripping with absolute ice. "I spent 3 hours yesterday morning on a highly secure video conference with Madam CEO and her executive board. Her firm, Onyx Capital, just fully funded a $500 million infrastructure initiative that your own company aggressively lobbied for and subsequently failed to secure last quarter. I highly suggest you show some respect to the woman who is currently bankrolling the economic expansion of this state." Desmond physically recoiled, staggering back half a step, as if he had been punched squarely in the jaw. Vivica rushed to his side, gripping his arm tightly, her heavily manicured fingers digging desperately into his expensive tuxedo jacket. The whispers among the elite crowd instantly skyrocketed into a frantic, buzzing crescendo. The wealthiest real estate developers and socialites in the city were watching the untouchable Desmond Pierce being publicly, effortlessly dressed down by the highest-ranking official in the state, all on behalf of the daughter he had spent the last 5 years aggressively pretending did not exist. The governor offered me one final respectful nod before his security detail smoothly guided him toward the private bar area. As soon as the political entourage moved out of earshot, the thin, fragile veneer of my parents' sanity completely shattered. Desmond signaled frantically to the 4 massive, broad-shouldered private security guards stationed near the grand ballroom entrance. He pointed a shaking, furious finger directly at my face. "Get her out of my house right now!" Desmond roared, completely abandoning any remaining pretense of high society decorum. "Grab her by her arms and throw her out onto the street. She is trespassing. She is actively ruining the most important night of my corporate career." The security guards moved forward in unison, their expressions grim and determined. Before they could even come within 10 feet of me, Isaiah stepped smoothly into their path. He did not raise his fists. He did not raise his voice. He simply reached into his tailored breast pocket and pulled out a crisp, heavily stamped legal document bearing the official embossed seal of the Fulton County Superior Court. "I strongly advise against touching my client," Isaiah said, his voice cutting through the rising chaos with lethal, terrifying precision. "This estate currently serves as the primary collateral for a defaulted commercial loan, now legally owned by Onyx Capital. As of an emergency injunction filed at 4 o'clock this afternoon, Naomi Pierce Sterling is the primary lien holder of this physical property. If you attempt to forcefully remove the legal owner from her own premises, I will personally see to it that you are all arrested for aggravated assault and massive civil rights violations." The security guards froze instantly. They looked at the highly official court order in Isaiah's hand, then looked back at Desmond, clearly recognizing that their billionaire boss no longer held the actual power in the room. They slowly backed away, retreating to their posts near the heavy oak doors, leaving Desmond and Vivica completely defenseless and exposed. Vivica looked around the ballroom, her eyes wide and frantic. She saw her wealthy country club friends, the women she had spent decades trying to impress and manipulate, whispering behind their hands, pointing directly at her crumbling empire. The social humiliation was absolutely tearing her apart from the inside out. Seeing her parents utterly paralyzed and failing to eject me, Chantel decided to take matters into her own desperate hands. She abandoned Andre near the catering tables and aggressively pushed her way through the crowded ballroom, her high heels clicking sharply against the polished marble. She marched straight up the carpeted steps of the main stage, pushing past the jazz band, and aggressively snatched the microphone from its silver stand. The loud, screeching feedback of the microphone echoed painfully through the cavernous ballroom, forcing everyone to cover their ears and turn their attention directly to the stage. Chantel stood under the bright, focused spotlight, gripping the microphone tightly, her face twisted into a mask of pure, toxic desperation, masquerading as concern. Excuse me, everyone. Please, may I have your attention?" Chantel projected her voice loudly, putting on a highly theatrical performance. She placed her free hand over her heart, looking out at the wealthy crowd with wide, fake, sympathetic eyes. "We apologize for this uncomfortable disruption to our beautiful anniversary celebration. Unfortunately, some people in our family are so deeply consumed by jealousy that they create fake companies to terrorize us." A collective shocked gasp rippled through the audience. I stood perfectly still, watching her dig her own grave deeper with every single syllable. "Let us pray for my mentally unwell sister-in-law, Naomi Chantel," continued, her voice dripping with manufactured pity. "She ran away from our loving home because she simply could not handle the pressure of living up to the Pierce family standard of excellence. Now she shows up to our beautiful charity gala hiring actors and printing fake documents to convince herself she is powerful. It is incredibly tragic. Please ignore her delusions and enjoy the rest of your evening." Vivica nodded vigorously from the floor, loudly adding, Yes. The poor girl is deeply unwell. We have tried everything to get her psychiatric help. She always lacked the Pierce ambition. We had to cut her off to teach her tough love, but her illness has only gotten worse. The crowd murmured, clearly confused by the conflicting narratives. The governor had just validated my massive corporate firm, yet my own family was publicly branding me as a psychotic, delusional fraud. It was a desperate scorched earth tactic. Chantel was attempting to completely destroy my credibility before I could utter a single word about her embezzlement or Andre's forgery. I did not scream. I did not yell back at the stage to defend my sanity. I simply turned away from the crowd and began walking slowly toward the shadowy back corner of the grand ballroom. There, sitting behind a massive array of soundboards and lighting equipment, was the hired audio-visual technician. He was a young man, looking incredibly uncomfortable with the family drama unfolding in front of him. I approached his station with calm, unwavering purpose. I reached into my small velvet clutch and pulled out a sleek silver flash drive. I placed the drive gently on his control board. "Play it on the main screens," I commanded softly, sliding a thick stack of crisp $100 bills directly next to the digital drive. "Right now. Override the current presentation." The technician looked at the cash, then looked at my cold, determined eyes. He did not ask a single question. He quickly grabbed the flash drive and jammed it into the primary server port. His fingers flew across the illuminated keyboard, aggressively overriding the Pierce family tribute video that was queued up for the anniversary toast. Up on the main stage, Chantel was still gripping the microphone, soaking up the spotlight, preparing to deliver another round of toxic, manipulative lies about my mental health. She raised the microphone to her lips, flashing a brilliant, victorious smile to the crowd. But she never got the chance to speak. The three massive high-definition LED screens, suspended directly behind the stage, suddenly flickered, completely black. The soft ambient lighting in the ballroom instantly dimmed, plunging the opulent space into dramatic theatrical shadows. The crowd gasped again, their eyes locking onto the giant screens. The screens violently flared back to life in blinding, brilliant white light. Instead of the planned slideshow, featuring decades of heavily curated fake Pierce family memories, the screens displayed crystal clear, heavily magnified images of highly classified financial documents. The screen on the far left displayed the complete Vanguard credit loan agreement. Andre's name was printed boldly at the top, securing $5 million. But the camera zoomed in aggressively on the final signature page. It showed two completely different versions of my signature side by side. One was my authentic, legally verified signature from a registered corporate filing. The other was the sloppy, desperate forgery Andre had used to steal the money. A bright red, undeniable text box flashed across the screen. "Federal wire fraud confirmed. Forgery executed by Andre Pierce." The massive screen on the right displayed something even more devastating. It showed the private banking portal of Vivica's historically black college charity foundation. The screen displayed a continuous rolling list of unauthorized wire transfers. Every single transfer was routed directly to a private offshore account registered in the Cayman Islands under the name Chantel Pierce. The screen zoomed in on a specific transaction from 3 days ago, highlighting the exact purchase of a $30,000 Himalayan crocodile Birkin bag using funds designated for underprivileged student scholarships. Another red text box flashed violently. "Embezzlement of non-profit funds. Grand larceny executed by Chantel Pierce." The center screen tied the entire operation together. It displayed the official stamped corporate acquisition deed. It showed Onyx Capital legally purchasing Vanguard Credit, legally acquiring Andre's defaulted loan, and legally seizing the Buckhead mansion as collateral. The bottom of the deed clearly listed the founder and chief executive officer, Naomi Pierce Sterling. Chantel slowly turned around, looking up at the massive screens towering directly behind her. The microphone slipped from her manicured hand, hitting the wooden stage floor with a loud, deafening crash that echoed through the entirely paralyzed ballroom. Her jaw dropped open in pure, unadulterated terror. The Birkin bag she had been so proudly flaunting all evening suddenly looked like a glowing neon sign of her impending federal indictment. Andre staggered backward, knocking over a tray of champagne glasses. The crystal shattered loudly against the marble floor, mirroring the absolute catastrophic destruction of the Pierce family empire. The sharp sound of shattering crystals snapped the paralyzed ballroom back to reality. The jazz band abruptly stopped playing mid-note, the musicians lowering their instruments in absolute shock as they stared up at the towering digital evidence. The collective gasp from the hundreds of wealthy real estate developers, politicians, and Atlanta socialites sucked the remaining oxygen right out of the opulent room. They were no longer guests at a prestigious anniversary gala. They were the premier audience to a highly calculated, flawlessly executed corporate execution. Chantel stood frozen under the bright stage lights, her perfectly manicured hands trembling violently at her sides. She looked like a deer caught in the headlights of a massive freight train. The glowing red text highlighting her offshore Cayman Islands account and the stolen HBCU scholarship funds reflected directly in her wide, terrified eyes. The elite women she had spent years desperately trying to impress were now pointing directly at her, their faces twisted in absolute disgust. I did not rush. I walked slowly and deliberately up the carpeted steps of the main stage, my obsidian velvet gown sweeping elegantly across the wooden floor. The wealthy crowd literally parted for me, stepping aside with a newfound terrifying reverence. I reached down and picked up the microphone Chantel had dropped. The heavy silver metal felt cool and solid in my grip. I turned to face the vast silent ballroom, projecting an aura of absolute undisputed authority. "Good evening, Atlanta," I said, my voice echoing smoothly through the high-end surround sound speakers cutting through the thick, suffocating tension in the room. Allow me to properly introduce myself, since my family has spent the last 5 years aggressively trying to erase my existence. My name is Naomi Pierce Sterling. I am the founder and chief executive officer of Onyx Capital. A fresh wave of shocked murmurs rolled through the elite crowd. Desmond stood paralyzed near the front row, his face pale and slick with cold sweat, his mouth opening and closing without producing a single sound. I looked directly down at my father, holding his terrified gaze. I am the chief executive of the firm that now legally owns every single brick of this lavish Buckhead estate. I announced, my words landing like physical blows. I own every single share of Pierce Commercial Real Estate. I own the chair you sit in, the desk you work at, and every cent of the $5 million debt your golden boy son fraudulently acquired. You told me 5 years ago that I was no longer part of this family because I refused to fund his delusions. You were right, Desmond. I am not your daughter anymore. I am your primary creditor, and your lease has officially expired. The sheer magnitude of the public humiliation completely broke Andre. His toxic, fragile ego could not process the fact that the sister he had mercilessly mocked and belittled his entire life was now standing on a stage publicly declaring ownership of his entire existence. A guttural, furious scream ripped from his throat. He blindly charged toward the stage, his fists clenched, his face contorted in a mask of pure, unadulterated rage. He fully intended to physically attack me in front of the entire city. I did not even make it up the first step. Isaiah moved with the terrifying, effortless speed of an apex predator. He stepped smoothly in front of the stage, intercepting my brother's aggressive charge without breaking a sweat. Isaiah grabbed Andre by the lapels of his custom tuxedo, pivoted sharply and brutally twisted Andre's arm high behind his back. He forced the golden boy to his knees on the hard marble floor. Andre cried out in pain, struggling pathetically against Isaiah's iron grip, but he was completely immobilized. I walked to the edge of the stage, looking down at my older brother as he kneeled helplessly before me. "You forged my signature to steal $5 million from a shadow lender," Andre, I stated, ensuring the microphone picked up every single damning syllable. "You committed federal identity theft and wire fraud because you were too incompetent to build a real tech company. Did you really think a glorified accountant would not notice a massive felony attached to her personal credit report? Did you honestly believe you could outsmart a woman who actively manages billions of dollars in private equity? You are not a visionary, Andre. You are just a very sloppy thief." "Let him go!" Vivica shrieked, finally breaking out of her paralyzed state. She shoved her way through the front row of guests, her silver gown rustling aggressively as she ran toward her son. She pointed a shaking, furious finger at me. tears of pure rage streaming down her perfectly contoured face. How can you do this to your own flesh and blood, Naomi? Have you lost your mind? We are your family. We are supposed to protect each other. You are destroying our legacy over money. I turned my lethal focus directly onto my mother, the woman who had spent decades enabling the abuse, who had watched me walk out into the rain 5 years ago without shedding a single tear, was suddenly preaching about loyalty. Do not dare speak to me about family protection. Vivica, I replied, my voice dropping to a low, dangerous cadence that commanded the entire room. You want to talk about destroying a legacy? You should probably ask your perfect, flawless daughter-in-law how she afforded that stunning Cartier necklace she is currently wearing. Or perhaps you should ask her how she paid for the $30,000 Birkin bag she was just flaunting to your country club friends. Vivica froze, her tear-filled eyes darting in confusion toward Chantel, who was actively trying to slowly back away into the shadows of the stage curtains. Look at the screens behind me, Mother, I commanded, pointing sharply at the glowing digital banking logs overhead. Your beloved daughter-in-law did not just marry into your family for the status. She has been systematically draining your historically black college scholarship fund for months. She embezzled over $200,000 of charitable donations meant for marginalized students. She wired that money directly into a private, untraceable offshore account in the Cayman Islands to fund her luxury shopping sprees. Vivica physically stumbled backward, the horrific reality slamming into her chest. She turned her head slowly, staring at Chantel with an expression of pure, unadulterated betrayal. The elite women in the crowd, many of whom had personally donated thousands of dollars to that exact charity, erupted in furious, aggressive shouting. The socialite circles that Vivica had spent her entire life desperately trying to cultivate were instantly transforming into an angry, hostile mob. No, Vivica gasped, her hands flying to her mouth as she stared at the glaring red text on the massive screens. Chantel, tell me she is lying. Tell me you did not steal from the foundation. Chantel could not speak. Her face was completely devoid of color, her eyes darting frantically around the room, searching for an exit that simply did not exist. She looked like a trapped animal. The high society women she had stepped on to climb the social ladder were now glaring at her with absolute predatory hatred. She is not going to answer you, Vivica, I stated smoothly, taking control of the chaotic room once again. Because she knows that my forensic accountants have already submitted every single cloned server log and wire transfer receipt to the federal authorities. You are facing a massive audit by the Internal Revenue Service tomorrow morning, Mother. Your entire social standing, your precious nonprofit foundation, and your pristine public image are completely dead. You protected the wrong people, and now you are going to pay the ultimate price for your blinding ignorance. Desmond let out a ragged, agonizing groan from the floor. He had sunk to his knees next to Andre, his hands clutching his chest, his breathing incredibly shallow. He looked up at me, a broken, defeated billionaire, realizing that his entire kingdom had been conquered by the daughter he deemed worthless. The Pierce family was officially destroyed. Their wealth was seized. Their reputations were publicly slaughtered in front of the governor and the entire Atlanta elite. Every single lie they had ever told had been violently dragged out into the harsh, unforgiving light. I stood on the stage, looking out over the shattered remains of my abusive family. I felt absolutely no guilt. I felt no remorse. I felt nothing but the pure, unadulterated weight of absolute justice. I had not just taken their money. I had dismantled the very foundation of their toxic arrogance. I had stripped away the golden armor they used to protect themselves from accountability. Suddenly, the heavy ambient atmosphere in the grand ballroom began to shift. The warm golden light radiating from the massive crystal chandeliers seemed to be competing with a harsh, urgent new illumination. I looked past the stunned, silent crowd of wealthy investors toward the front of the estate. Through the towering, custom-stained glass windows that lined the grand entrance of the Buckhead mansion, a frantic, pulsing rhythm of bright lights began to reflect across the polished marble floors. The flashing, alternating blue and red lights of multiple police cruisers illuminated the darkness outside, casting long, dramatic shadows across the ballroom walls. The distant, high-pitched wail of approaching sirens grew rapidly louder, completely surrounding the sprawling estate. The trap had fully snapped shut. The authorities had arrived. The heavy custom mahogany doors of the grand ballroom did not just open, they were violently pushed apart. A massive team of federal agents wearing dark tactical jackets bearing the bold yellow letters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, Economic Crimes Division flooded into the opulent space. The sheer overwhelming force of their entry completely shattered whatever fragile remnants of high society decorum were left in the room. The wealthiest power brokers, real estate tycoons, and politicians in Atlanta immediately scrambled backward, pressing their expensive tailored suits and designer silk gowns against the floral wallpaper. They were desperate to put as much physical distance as possible between themselves and the radioactive catastrophic fallout of the Pierce family. The lead federal agent, a tall, unsmiling man with cold, calculating eyes, walked with heavy, deliberate steps directly toward the main stage. He did not pause to admire the cascading crystal chandeliers or the extravagant indoor floral arrangements. He locked his intense gaze onto my brother, who was still kneeling helplessly on the cold marble floor, completely immobilized by Isaiah's iron grip. Andre Pierce, the lead agent, announced, his voice slicing through the terrified, buzzing whispers of the elite crowd with absolute, unyielding authority. You are under arrest for multiple counts of federal wire fraud, aggravated identity theft, and conspiracy to commit bank fraud across state lines. Isaiah smoothly released his punishing grip on my older brother, stepping back to stand firmly and protectively at my side. Two federal agents instantly lunged forward, grabbing Andre roughly by his biceps and hauling him forcefully to his feet. They aggressively twisted his arms behind his back and slammed his wrists into heavy steel handcuffs. The sharp metallic click of the restraints locking into place echoed violently across the dead silent ballroom, sounding like the final definitive slam of a prison cell door. "This is a massive mistake," Andre screamed, his voice cracking with pure pathetic terror as the agents began dragging him toward the main exit. He thrashed wildly against their grip, his expensive designer tuxedo jacket tearing at the seam. "Dad, do something right now. Call your corporate lawyers. Tell these agents they have the wrong man. Tell them I am innocent." Desmond did not move a single muscle. He just stood frozen near the front row of guests, his chest heaving, staring blankly at his golden boy being hauled away like a common, desperate street criminal. The illusion of his powerful, untouchable son was completely obliterated. Across the room, Chantel was not screaming. She was actively trying to become invisible. She had quickly kicked off her high heels and was desperately inching her way along the heavy velvet curtains lining the back of the stage. She was frantically hoping the massive chaos surrounding Andre's arrest would provide enough of a distraction for her to escape through the catering kitchen and disappear into the night. She did not even make it 5 feet before her escape plan violently collapsed. A female federal agent stepped directly into Chantel's narrow path, shining a bright, blinding, tactical flashlight directly into her panicked, tear-streaked face. "Chantel Pierce, you are under arrest for grand larceny, federal embezzlement of registered nonprofit funds, and extensive tax evasion," the agent stated firmly, pulling a pair of handcuffs from her tactical belt. "No, no, please wait," Chantel begged, holding up her trembling hands as if she could physically push the devastating federal charges away. The expensive diamond bracelets on her wrists clinked loudly together, a stark contrast to the severe legal jeopardy she was facing. "I did not know what I was doing. My husband managed all the finances. He made me initiate those offshore transfers. I will give all the money back tomorrow morning. I will sell the designer bags and the jewelry. Just let me go home. Please, I am a respected member of this community." The female agent ignored her pathetic, cowardly bargaining entirely. She spun Chantel around without an ounce of hesitation, aggressively forcing her arms behind her back and locking her firmly into the steel cuffs. As Chantel was marched down the steps of the stage in her bare feet, she looked out frantically at the sea of Atlanta socialites she had spent years desperately trying to impress and manipulate. The elite women of Buckhead did not offer her a single ounce of sympathy. They glared at her with absolute, unadulterated disgust. Chantel had not just stolen money. She had actively embezzled from a charity fund that many of these exact women had personally donated thousands of dollars to support. In their insulated, highly privileged world, stealing from marginalized students, to fund a luxury shopping addiction was an unforgivable terminal sin. Chantel's desperate social climbing days were permanently legally over. The grand ballroom was now completely purged of its toxic, fraudulent golden children. The only Pierce family members left standing on the marble floor were Desmond and Vivica. My father, the supposedly untouchable titan of Atlanta commercial real estate, the man who had mercilessly ruled his corporate empire through pure fear and aggressive intimidation, completely unraveled in front of the entire city. The suffocating, undeniable reality of his total financial and social destruction finally crushed the last remaining pillars of his massive, fragile ego. His billion-dollar company was gone. His sprawling mansions were legally seized. His beloved son was heading straight to a federal penitentiary. His entire carefully curated legacy was reduced to a spectacular, highly publicized joke. Desmond stumbled forward, his legs suddenly giving out entirely beneath his heavy frame. The towering, arrogant billionaire fell hard to his knees, right in the absolute center of the grand ballroom. His tailored tuxedo jacket bunched up awkwardly around his broad shoulders. He looked up at me, standing powerfully above him on the illuminated stage, projecting the cold, ruthless corporate power he used to believe he naturally possessed. "Naomi, please!" Desmond begged, his voice breaking into a ragged, agonizing sob that genuinely shocked the remaining elite guests. The raw sound of this ruthless, highly feared tycoon, weeping openly on the floor, was profoundly disturbing to watch, yet looking down at him, I felt absolutely nothing. "You have proven your point, Naomi. You won the game. You beat us at our own business. Just tell the federal authorities to drop the criminal charges against your brother. Give me back the commercial property deeds. I will make you a full equal partner in the firm by tomorrow morning. I will give you whatever you want. Please, Naomi. I am your father. I gave you life." He reached out with trembling, desperate hands, trying frantically to grab the hem of my sweeping obsidian velvet gown. Isaiah immediately stepped forward with lightning speed to physically intercept him, fully prepared to neutralize the threat, but I calmly raised my right hand, signaling my fiercely protective husband to hold his position. I wanted to handle this final pathetic display of emotional manipulation entirely by myself. I looked down at the broken, weeping man kneeling helplessly on the cold marble floor. I did not feel a single ounce of lingering anger, buried sadness, or triumphant vindication. I felt absolute surgical precision. I was looking at a complete stranger who had just bankrupted a company I now owned. "You did not give me life, Desmond." I stated, my voice incredibly calm, echoing with lethal, unemotional clarity through the dead silent, cavernous ballroom. "You gave me an ultimatum." Desmond froze instantly. His tear-filled eyes widened in sheer horror as the dark ghosts of his own toxic, abusive actions came rushing back to completely destroy him. "5 years ago, you stood at a Thanksgiving dinner table and aggressively screamed at me." I continued, enunciating every single word perfectly so the elite crowd could hear the exact origin of this spectacular corporate slaughter. "You selfishly demanded I drain my own survival funds to finance Andre's pathetic delusions. And when I rightfully refused to be your sacrificial lamb, you looked me dead in the eyes and told me I was no longer a part of this family." Desmond let out a hollow, agonizing gasp, his head dropping heavily down into his trembling hands. "I am not destroying you out of petty revenge, Desmond," I declared, sealing his fate with absolute corporate finality. "I am simply honoring your explicit wishes. I am behaving exactly like a ruthless corporate predator who has absolutely no familial ties or emotional obligations to the bankrupt man currently kneeling on my floor." I reached into my velvet clutch and pulled out a single heavily stamped legal document. It was not a merger agreement or a generous partnership offer. I walked slowly down the carpeted steps of the main stage and stopped right in front of my weeping father. I dropped the crisp white paper directly onto the marble floor, letting it fall right between his trembling, defeated hands. "That is a formal court-ordered eviction notice," I announced, projecting my voice to ensure the finality of the night was absolute and legally binding. "As the founder and chief executive officer of Onyx Capital, I am formally notifying you that this Buckhead estate is now an active liquidated asset belonging entirely to my firm. You and Vivica have exactly 24 hours to pack your personal belongings and completely vacate the premises. If you are still inside my physical property by tomorrow evening, I will have the county sheriff forcefully remove you for criminal trespassing. Vivica, who had been standing completely frozen and horrified near the catering tables, let out a piercing, devastated wail that shattered the quiet room. She rushed forward frantically, completely abandoning her sobbing husband on the floor, and ran directly toward her elite country club friends. She reached out with shaking arms, desperately trying to grab the hands of the wealthy politicians' wives and real estate heiresses she had spent her entire adult life serving gossiping with and trying to impress. Please, Vivica cried out, her silver designer gown dragging heavily across the floor as she stumbled toward the retreating crowd. You know us. We are good, upstanding people. Please, someone let us stay in your guest house. Let us borrow your driver just until we sort out this terrible, embarrassing misunderstanding. The wealthy women of Atlanta did not offer her a single word of comfort. They looked at Vivica Pierce with cold, razor-sharp, unforgiving contempt. The woman they had once toasted, envied, and invited to their exclusive luncheons was now highly toxic, completely broke, and intimately associated with massive federal embezzlement. In perfect unspoken synchronization, the elite socialites physically turned their backs on my mother. They gathered their expensive silk wraps and designer clutches in a flurry of disgusted whispers, walking swiftly toward the grand exit, completely ignoring her pathetic sobbing pleas. Vivica sank to her knees, weeping hysterically, left entirely alone in the center of a stolen ballroom as the world she worshipped abandoned her to the darkness. The fallout from the anniversary gala was swift, brutal, and thoroughly documented by every major news outlet in the Southeast. The Pierce family name, once a golden ticket in Atlanta, high society, became absolutely radioactive overnight. Andre did not survive the federal indictment process, with his arrogance intact. Faced with mountains of irrefutable digital evidence provided by Onyx Capital, his overpriced defense attorneys advised him to surrender. The judge presiding over his case was completely unmoved by his tears during the sentencing hearing. My older brother was handed a mandatory 7-year sentence in a federal penitentiary for wire fraud and identity theft. The golden child traded his custom-tailored suits for a standard-issue orange jumpsuit stripped of the unearned wealth that had entirely defined his hollow existence. Chantel fared no better in the court of public opinion or the court of law. Desperate to avoid serving hard time alongside her husband, she immediately turned state evidence and accepted a severe plea deal. She narrowly avoided a lengthy prison sentence, but the terms of her plea mandated full financial restitution and permanently destroyed any chance she had of showing her face in Buckhead ever again. She was blacklisted from every country club, charity board, and luxury boutique in the city. Her carefully curated socialite life vanished instantly. Desmond and Vivica faced the harshest reality check of all. True to my word, the county sheriff enforced the eviction notice exactly 24 hours after I dropped it on the ballroom floor. My parents were physically escorted off the sweeping driveway of the Buckhead estate, with only the clothes on their backs, and whatever fit into 2 small suitcases. Stripped of their commercial real estate empire and facing total bankruptcy, they were forced to relocate to a tiny rundown 1-bedroom apartment on the extreme outskirts of the city. Their former high society friends completely ostracized them. The country club canceled their memberships. The wealthy politicians they used to bribe stopped answering their calls. Desmond spent his days sitting in a cramped, poorly ventilated living room, staring blankly at a small television, mourning the massive empire he had arrogantly handed over to the daughter he despised. Vivica could not even walk into a local grocery store without being recognized as the woman whose family stole from marginalized college students. They were entirely isolated, suffocating in the profound, crushing poverty they had once ruthlessly mocked. While they withered away in their self-made misery, I set about aggressively restructuring the ashes of their former kingdom. Onyx Capital officially absorbed the entirety of Pierce Commercial Real Estate. However, I had absolutely no intention of maintaining my father's predatory business model. He had built his fortune by aggressively gentrifying historical black neighborhoods, pushing out generational residents, to build overpriced, sterile retail plazas. I ordered my executive board to execute a massive systemic pivot. We initiated a comprehensive urban redevelopment initiative. The commercial properties we seized from Desmond were systematically converted into high-quality, deeply affordable housing complexes, specifically designed for marginalized families and young Black professionals being priced out of Atlanta. We partnered with local community leaders to ensure the new developments included subsidized childcare centers, grocery cooperatives, and accessible health clinics. I systematically dismantled my father's monument to corporate greed and transformed it into a cornerstone of community empowerment. It was the ultimate poetic demolition of his toxic legacy. I also needed to address the deep, festering wound Chantel had inflicted on the community. The historically Black college scholarship fund had been severely crippled by her rampant embezzlement. The day the federal auditors officially cleared the charity accounts, I initiated a direct corporate wire transfer from my personal Onyx Capital reserves. I did not just replace the $200,000 Chantel had stolen to fund her luxury shopping sprees. I personally tripled the amount. I injected $600,000 directly into the foundation. I established a new, highly secure operational board and mandated that the funds be distributed immediately to first-generation college students facing severe financial hardship. I ensured that the very demographic my family had ruthlessly exploited would now be fully protected and entirely funded by my success. 6 months after the collapse of the Pierce family, the dust had completely settled. I stood on the expansive glass balcony of my newly acquired penthouse suite, feeling the warm, humid southern breeze wash over me. The view from this elevation was absolutely breathtaking. The sprawling, glittering skyline of downtown Atlanta stretched out infinitely in every single direction. It was a city pulsing with electric energy, a city my father used to claim he owned, a city I now effectively controlled through the sheer unstoppable momentum of my investment firm. Isaiah stepped quietly out onto the balcony holding 2 crystal glasses of vintage champagne. He handed one to me, his dark eyes reflecting the vibrant neon city lights. He looked incredibly sharp, projecting the calm, lethal intelligence that made him the most feared corporate attorney in the state. He wrapped his strong, reassuring arm around my waist, pulling me close against his chest. We stood together in the comfortable, triumphant silence, watching the steady stream of headlights moving along the busy highways far below us. We navigated a brutal, unforgiving storm to get to this exact altitude. The people who were supposed to protect and nurture me had instead tried to break me down to nothing. They had demanded my absolute submission. They had actively tried to destroy my future just to maintain their fragile manufactured illusion of superiority. But their rejection was the absolute greatest gift they could have ever given me. It forced me to forge my own indestructible armor. I took a slow sip of the crisp champagne, savoring the taste of absolute, undeniable victory. I looked out over the glowing metropolis, my heart beating with fierce, unapologetic power. They told me I was nothing without their name. They were right. I am not a Pierce anymore. I am an empire. I turned and kissed Isaiah deeply, anchoring myself in the only true family I would ever need. I pulled away, offering him a sharp, victorious smile. I turned my back to the camera, the night wind catching the edge of my silk dress, and walked confidently back inside, stepping right into the glowing, brilliant lights of my corporate boardroom. Fade to black.